the air.
Today? Well, I won't say yet. I'll wait till we're on the air, and then I'll tell you what I'm working on.
And we are live. And this is the TWIS Minion Science Island Hangout. And I'm Ed from the great state of Connecticut, Northeast USA. Joining us are Dale, my friend Dale from Canada. He's building something, perhaps building some top secret weapon.
It's a critical, absolutely mission critical item. It's training wheels for my daughter for her bike.
Why am I hearing myself? Oh. Okay, somebody, hopefully not me, is playing it so I can hear myself. Can you guys hear me speaking?
I can hear you. I don't hear an echo.
Yep, I can hear you. I don't hear an echo.
There's no echo here. I'm going to try muting.
Heck, am I hearing my own? Guys, it's my fault, I guess. Mission control. Every week it's got to be something. All right. I don't. That was the Hangout on YouTube. I don't know what happened, guys. Real professional. Here we go. Justin, that's us. We're a bunch of real professionals.
The best kind.
Yeah. And we have Justin, Pamela's friend, joining us also. And there we have Pamela and Chelsey. Chelsey wide awake. And we're going to have it start off with a little show and tell. Pamela, you want to go ahead?
So I was talking to Justin before this, and we were talking about my breast milk, and he was asking about the consistency of it and everything. So I was just going to do a little show and tell. So I've got some in the freezer. So that's a bit of excess, and I was just saying that it's watery and creamy. So when I pump, and then I tip it out of the pump into a bottle, there's a creamy residue left over in the pump. So this is the stuff that I tip out. So it's frozen. So it's like ice cream.
You can buy breast milk ice cream.
Yeah. Yeah, I just make my own there. So there you go. That's some spare stuff.
I didn't know you could buy it. Where do you buy that? I've never seen it in a grocery store. Is it maybe a national thing? You can get it in some countries, not others?
Amazon. You can buy anything. You can buy nuclear weapons from Amazon. You can get anything.
Okay, I thought this was more of a...
You go into the great God Google, and you just plug in buy breast milk or breast milk ice cream, and you'll probably get 43 producers in the United States or something.
Okay, I thought it might have been a Silk Road type purchase.
Not unless it's laced with something extra.
Yeah.
If it's laced with something extra, then maybe not so much. But I don't think Pamela would do that. I don't know.
No, mine's just straight up, nothing added. It's organic. It's
Real organic.
Really organic.
Okay, we've actually got some science, and we're going to be talking about some animals. And researchers discovered the first animal. It's a worm that has a magnetic field sensor in it. Now, there's been suspicions that a lot of migrating animals like butterflies and other birds have used the Earth's magnetic field for direction, but no one's been able to find the actual sensor itself. Well, in this case, they found the sensor in some worms. They're Australian worms, actually. And one of the reasons why they realized this, or they proved it, was that they had different worms from different areas, and the Australian worms, instead of going down, went up, because they're in an environment where the magnetic field is different. They didn't realize it. That's pretty interesting. We've got some ants in the Sahara Desert who use electromagnetic waves to stay cool. We have got researchers in the lab, when they create their organisms, etc., in the lab, one question is, of course, they want to be able to control them as much as possible. So what these researchers have discovered is what they call a molecular lock and key. And what that means is that the organism is, its default condition is to die. So unless this key is turned on, they're going to die. Other cool stuff like the West Coast. The guys out in California, if they're not getting slammed enough, now they may have the largest toxic algae bloom ever recorded. Yippee. Okay, Dale. What's the secret weapon you're building?
Well, like I said, it's pretty boring. I'm just putting training wheels on my daughter's bicycle. So
a training wheel. Okay. And
So,
of course it's for your daughter's bicycle. Of course it is.
so hopefully I'll figure this one out. So I'm
How
gonna
old
work.
is
She's 8 years old.
Mhm.
So she can't wait to get on the bike.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's maybe the first step in real independence.
Mm-hmm. She's very independent. Extreme.
All right. Let's jump into the first science story. And this is the people from the University of Texas at Austin. And let me screen share it. Don't want you guys looking at the top of my head. That's not such a pretty sight. And you can actually see a little picture of what it looks like. And this is the first sensor of the Earth's magnetic field in an animal. Finding in the brain of a tiny worm, and it's a big clue to long-held mystery about how animals' internal compasses work. They find it in this little worm, and now they know where to look for it when they look at pigeons or the butterflies that have long migrations. Animals as diverse as migrating geese, sea turtles, and wolves are known to navigate using the Earth's magnetic field. But until now, no one has pinpointed quite how they do it. The sensor found in the worms called C. elegans is a microscopic structure at the end of a neuron that other animals probably share, given similarities in brain structures across species. The sensors looks like a tiny scale TV antenna. Actually, it looks like a little bird. And the worms use it to navigate underground. Chances are the same molecules used by other animals, like butterflies and birds. The research discovered that the hungry worms in a gelatin-filled tubes tend to move down, a strategy they might use when searching for food. When the researchers brought the worms into the lab from other parts of the world, the worms didn't all move down. Depending on where they were from, Hawaii, England, or Australia, for example, they moved at a precise angle to the magnetic field that would have corresponded to down if they had back home. For instance, Australian worms moved upward in the tubes. The magnetic field's orientation varies from spot to spot on Earth, and each worm's magnetic field sensor system is finely tuned to its local environment. And the study's lead author, Andres Vidal Gady, a former postdoctoral researcher at the College of Natural Sciences in University of Texas, Austin, noted that the C. elegans is just one of the myriad species living in the soil, many of which are known to migrate vertically. The neuroscientists and engineers who use C. elegans in their research into Alzheimer's disease and addiction had previously discovered the worm's ability to sense humidity. That work led them to ask what else the worms might be able to sense, such as magnetic fields. Another group of scientists in 2012 from Baylor College announced the discovery of brain cells in pigeons that process information about magnetic fields, but they did not discover in which part of the body senses the fields. That team and others have proposed a magnosensor in the bird's inner ear. The researchers discovered the worm's magnosensory abilities by altering the magnetic field around them with a special magnetic coil system, and then observing changes in behavior. They also showed that worms which are genetically engineered to have a broken AFD neuron did not orient themselves up and down as normal worms do. And finally, the researchers used a technique called calcium imaging to demonstrate that changes in the magnetic field caused the AFD neuron to activate. There you go.
That's super cool.
Just another example of how we're finding our ability to examine even down to the molecular structure, neurons, individual neurons, is leading to a dramatic increase in our understanding of organisms and their capabilities. I have another story about an insect called the Saharan silver ants. And in this case, they've evolved to use electronic waves to stay cool. And let me screen share that for you. Okay. There you go. There's the little Saharan silver ant. Okay. This is Nanfeng Yu, Associate Professor of Applied Physics at Columbia Engineering. He discovered two key strategies that enable Saharan silver ants to stay cool in one of the hottest environments on Earth. Yu's team is the first to demonstrate that the ants use a coat of uniquely shaped hairs to control electromagnetic waves over an extremely broad range from the solar spectrum, visible and near infrared, to the thermal radiation spectrum, mid-infrared, and that different physical mechanisms are used in different spectral bands to realize the same biological function of reducing body temperature. Telling example of how evolution has triggered the adaptation of physical attributes to accomplish a physiological task and ensure survival. And it's amazing to me how something like this, I mean, how it can evolve, how evolution itself works, and how long, how many poor little silver ants had to die, how many generations did they have to go through before they adapted the survival strategy. The project was initially triggered by wondering whether the ants' conspicuous silver coats were important in keeping them cool in blistering heat. And they found the answer was much broader once they realized the important role of infrared light. The discovery that there is a biological solution to thermoregulatory problem could lead to the development of novel flat optical components that exhibit optimal cooling properties. Such biologically inspired cooling surfaces will have high reflectivity in the solar spectrum and high radiative efficiency in the thermal spectrum. So this may generate useful applications in cooling surfaces for vehicles, buildings, instruments, etc. These ants, they can work in the full midday sun when surface temperatures reach up to 70 degrees Celsius or 158 degrees Fahrenheit. And they've got to keep their body temperature below their critical thermal maximum of 53 degrees Celsius or 128 degrees Fahrenheit. In their wide-ranging foraging journeys, they search for corpses of insects and other arthropods which have succumbed to these very harsh temperatures, and which they're able to endure more. These ants are able to endure. Being the most active during the hottest part of the day, they also can stay away from predatory lizards. Using electron microscopy and ion beam milling. Dale, what the heck is ion beam milling? Any clue? Hello, Dale.
Well, I think they're milling on the inside of the. Is it on the interior, or where are they milling?
I'm guessing it's the top of these ant skulls. It sounds like to me. Here's a picture. The hair is intact and the hair is removed, where you can see how much it affects the temperature. I'm assuming when they talk about ion milling, they're talking about removing the hairs. I don't know. In any event.
That's incredible.
They discovered the ants are covered on top and on the sides of their bodies with a coating of uniquely shaped hairs with triangular cross sections that keep them cool in two ways. These hairs are highly reflective under the visible and infrared light in the region of maximal solar radiation. The ants run at speeds of up to 0.07 meters per second and look like droplets of mercury on the desert. The hairs are also highly immersive in the mid-infrared portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, where they serve as an can't pronounce it, intraflexion layer, something like that enhances the ant's ability to offload excessive heat via thermal radiation, which is emitted from the hot body of the ants to the cool sky. The researchers found the enhanced reflectivity in the solar spectrum and enhanced thermal radiative efficiency have comparable contributions to reduce the body temperature of the ants to the by 10 to 15 degrees they need in order to survive. The fact these silver ants can manipulate electronic waves using a wide range of spectrum shows us how complex the function of these seemingly simple biological organs of an insect can be. Next, they're going to expand their research to other animals and organisms living in extreme environments to learn how these other animals cope with temperatures like this. Justin is here, I can see. And I can see Chelsea with a lollipop. Is that a lollipop?
No, it's a drum.
A drum?
Yeah.
Ooh.
It's a drum.
That's a nice looking drum.
Yeah, it's like a lollipop, but it's a drum. So now
There
we've
you
got
go.
two Justins now.
Yes, the original Justin. It was Minion Justin. And there's Pamela. And Chelsea's thrilled by the fact Pamela is beating her head on the top of the drum. And she's going to beat you on top of the head with it like a drum. I don't know.
Yeah, babies are violent.
It is. God, the first two stories really talk about amazing how all kinds of creatures, ants in this particular case, worms, how they evolved these abilities to survive.
Yeah, I
Amazing.
find it really interesting that they climb the opposite direction here because of the magnetic poles being the other way around. That's awesome.
Since Justin is here, I've got a really interesting story. He's one of those West Coasters.
Is he here though? We heard him. I can see his icon, but what's he
He
doing?
muted his microphone. I'm sure he will join in when he hears the exciting news that out in the West Coast, not only do they have droughts, not only do they have earthquakes, they've also got one of the largest recorded toxic algae blooms around the coast. Hooray! Okay, let me screen share once again. There we go. The largest toxic bloom perhaps ever recorded. And it goes from California all the way up to parts of Alaska. The effects of this algae bloom stretch from central California to British Columbia, possibly as far north as Alaska. Dangerous levels of the natural toxin domic acid have shut down recreational and commercial shellfish harvest in Washington, Oregon, and California, including the lucrative Dungeness crab fishery off of Washington's southern coast. Wow. I mean, they're one of my favorite crabs to eat, Dungeness crabs. They're well known, very well known. At the same time, two other types of toxins, rarely seen in combination, are turning up in shellfish in Puget Sound and along the Washington coast. And this is Vera Trainer. She's manager of marine microbes and toxin programs at the Northwest Fisheries Science Center in Seattle. The fact that we're seeing multiple toxins at the same time, we're seeing high levels of domic acid, and we're seeing a coast-wide bloom. These are indications that this is unprecedented. Scientists suspect this year's unseasonably high temperatures are playing a role, along with the blob. How's that for a great name? The blob. A vast pool of unusual warm water that blossoms in the northeastern Pacific late last year. The blob has morphed since then, but offshore waters are still about 2 degrees warmer than normal. This is a perfect plankton growing environment, says Dan Ayers. He's the shellfish manager for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Domic acid outbreaks are unusual in the fall, particularly in razor clams, but the toxin has never hit so hard in the spring or required such widespread closures for crabs. This is new territory for us. Heat is not the only factor spurring the proliferation of the marine algae. They also need a rich supply of nutrients along with the right currents to carry them close to shore. This is Rafael Cudaella of the University of California, Santa Cruz, and his colleagues found domic acid concentration in California anchovies this year, the highest they've ever measured. We haven't seen a bloom like this toxin in 15 years, possibly the largest event ever. In Washington's Long Beach Peninsula, it gets even better. Ayers recently spotted a sea lion wrecked by seizures typical of domic acid poisoning. They euthanized the creature, and when they examined it, they found that it had eaten prey, possibly small fish, that had fed on the toxin. Ayers' crews collect water and shellfish samples from around the state, many of which are analyzed by the Washington Department of Health Laboratory in Seattle, and the Department of Health also tests commercially harvested shellfish, so consumers can be confident, they say, that anything they buy is safe to eat. And that's the state's marine biotoxin coordinator. Domic acid concentration is rare in Puget Sound, but several beds have been closed this year because of the presence of the toxin that causes paralytic shellfish poisoning and a relatively new threat called diuretic shellfish poisoning. The first confirmed case of DSP poisoning in the United States occurred in 2011 in a family that ate mussels from Sequim Bay in the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. But 2015 is the first time regulators have detected dangerous levels of PSB, DSP, and domic acid in the state at the same time. It's a really bad year overall. Yeah, think. So there you go. Wonderful environmental news.
It's all very scary.
Yeah. It does seem like a trend. And anytime we see, I mean, in coastal waters anywhere, we're seeing more toxic, etc. Justin, eating shellfish there, perhaps? Having Duggan's crab lately?
No, I do eat a tremendous amount of tuna, but that's the only seafood I partake in.
Ah, you don't have to worry about tuna. You just got mercury poisoning. That's all.
It's overrated.
No, but there's the radiation issue in tuna, isn't there?
No, there's no radiation issue in the ocean. The oceans are not irradiated any more than being on land. Perhaps less so.
Tuna near California because of Fukushima.
Fukushima, no. There's no radioactive fish that are coming out of Fukushima. Nonsense.
Well, I don't eat tuna anyway, so.
I like tuna. I like sushi. One thing I think, though, with climate change, activists, the opinions on climate change, this is the kind of thing I think people may be going to take notice of. You know, when you start getting warnings, you get these huge algae blooms. When you're shutting down the Duggan's crab industry in Washington, that's big. That's the kind of thing, you know, people are going to start taking notice of.
Yeah, you know, that's true. It's going to be financial impacts that people notice and that impact people. But they have to be politically powerful enough financial interests that they can influence Washington. If they're not, then the cries will go unheard. This is basically what it comes down to. I mean, one of the great things about the Pope coming out and saying, you know, global warming is an actual crisis that we need to address is that he cuts through all media. He doesn't have to own his own media company. He's not the head of a network. He doesn't have to agree with sponsors. He doesn't have to have been contributing to multiple PACs across the country over the last decade to have his voice heard. He can come out and just say it, and 1 billion people take notice. You know, that's a huge megaphone. The Dungeness crab industry raising alarms will make some local news in Washington, or at least newspapers, if they have any non-corporate television stations, which they probably don't. They may make the local newspaper. They may hold a protest that gets picked up at the local 6 o'clock news and have a 5-minute blurb about. But in terms of getting the attention of those who, you know, have been in the pocket of big oil, it's not going to happen. It's not going to influence the national debate. It's not going to penetrate to the national media. This is the obscene thing about it. And actually, the Pope does a very good job of pointing out that political powers with profit agendas have been doing more to conceal and downplay the effects of global warming. And to hide its symptoms. Something I'm paraphrasing completely. And so yeah, I mean, what is the pain threshold for it to get politically advanced? And it's going to be big. It's going to be to the point where, you know, I mean, the flooding in Texas, for instance, or increased hurricanes, or polar vortexes, or whatever it is, the extreme weather, hasn't, you know, it gets mentioned, but it gets ignored right after. It's going to take really big tolls before anybody is allowed to take it seriously.
That's okay. If you're talking about, I agree with you completely when you're talking about national political figures. They're too entrenched at this point, at least in terms of if the Republicans maintain control of our Congress. They're too entrenched in the idea that we don't need to take any action. And I don't think it's that, even if whether they believe, climate change is a real thing or not. It's the main issue from them is they don't want to take action because they believe it's going to negatively impact their constituents. But what's happening certainly is at the local level, and we're talking about Washington. Go ahead.
When you say constituents, though, I think I got to limit you to donors. I think I got to limit you to financial backers. I think there can be clear and present danger to constituents, and it's one of those amazing things where you have people who are voting on things like pipeline or very for it, who are in states that are in no way fiscally impacted by the existence of, neither ecologically impacted by the existence of, like the Keystone Pipeline. You got people in Florida who are all completely for it, or in Alaska, completely for it, who have no constituents who are directly can be directly impacted for it. So I think it's to a very select donor base or financial backing of these parties. You could say the Koch brothers to put a name to it, but they're just part of that, group. But anyway, yeah. So I think I don't. If that's the, but I guess you could call that their constituency in their mind. Maybe that is who they believe they represent.
Well, that only works if you're the lobbyists, etc., to the extent that they can get out the vote. It all comes down to the vote. So even increasingly we're seeing politicians who are able to sort of kind of get elected without billions of dollars, at least at a lower level, without billions of dollars. Democrats got a lot of support too, but you're seeing at the local level people being elected who are more activist-minded, if I can use that term. Money still counts a great degree in the United States, but in Florida, for instance, you've got flooding. You'll have more hurricanes. And as you get more hurricanes, people are going to start asking questions. Or they're going to be more ready to accept some political action as you get more hurricanes that affect their property. Technology is probably going to be the answer eventually. But,
Well, part of it is, it doesn't take a lot of money for a Democratic or even a Republican to win if they're an incumbent in a majority Democratic voting, electorate pool, right? If those voting for you are 90% Democrat, chances are you don't have to spend as much money to beat your Republican foe. Where a tremendous amount of money is being spent is actually in Republican primaries or local Republican primary elections, where if the candidate in the local representative seat who's representing, in the state, 8,000, 12,000 people, 30,000 people altogether, right, or whatever it is, these rural districts, you're seeing a tremendous amount of money being poured into candidates in those primary GOP elections to determine which GOP person is going to win. If you don't tote the party line to every degree, your little election that you ran last time and won with $500,000 of advertising, all of a sudden there's a $20 million investment on the guy who's agreed to go whatever the PAC backers tell him to vote, whichever way that he will do. That's what's happening. So there's a threat, too. There's a threat. If you don't tote that line, a money bomb will be dropped in your next primary election. You might be a 3-4 time incumbent. You may have done plenty of good stuff for your constituents, but that $20 million money bomb in your next primary is going to end your political career. It's going to put in a yes man, and this has happened across. This is sort of the remarkable thing. The PACs and the GOP, well, the PACs that have been used for GOP candidates have largely been focused on GOP primaries, where GOP's the Republican Party was the majority and going to win anyway. But it's selecting the right Tea Party candidate or the right evangelical, right, whatever it is. But that's where a lot of the money from these PACs have been spent. It actually has been, not so much to beat Democrats in contested elections, but to put the right Republicans into office.
Dale, oops, I've caught you with your mouthful of food and now swigging down something. I thought maybe you wanted to jump in with a comment.
I don't know tons and tons about the U.S. political system, but this is kind of an offshoot. But last time, I think it was last time, you mentioned Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
That's the guy's name, right?
Yep.
So I went on YouTube and I almost feel like it's, so I discovered Ron Paul a few years ago, and I thought there's some kind of kooky elements, but a lot of what he had to say I liked. And you kind of get addicted. You start watching this stuff, and it's like, wow, that guy's making sense. Yeah. So I got the same vibe from Bernie Sanders, except he feels, compared to a Ron Paul, he feels just more moderate, common sense, not quite as extreme. But so the next thing I'm going to do is start looking up, does this guy actually have a shot? Can he catch fire somewhere? Or is this simply money is going to outdo this and you can buy the election? Is there no way?
Right. No, I know. That's always the fear. But here's so far what's encouraged me is everything I've seen that Hillary Clinton has put forward, who is the #1 candidate. Bernie is coming in the close second. Well, not close second. It depends on the poll, right? But everything that's been manufactured from the Hillary camp has been not what we've got from Bernie Sanders. Not a man speaking his mind with rational reason on specific issues with specific solutions and what he would do, but an ad campaign. She can't tell if she's for the TPP trade agreement or against it, and she'll come to this decision at a later date, even though she's been for other trade agreements, and she's got these proxy people out front who aren't even her speaking, but, she's putting somebody else out there in front of the press to answer these questions on her behalf who don't know what Hillary's decision is going to be, right? Like, where Bernie has been adamantly speaking out against this, speaking out about specific flaws in it, why he won't support it, and what the dangers of if it comes to fruition are. So, it's one of those things where one person's giving me the content. One person's giving me rational arguments for why they should be the president of the United States, and specifically what they would do, and across a wide breadth of issues that I can get some substance from. While the other is running an ad campaign that says, I'm for the working class and the minority and the LGBT and the single mothers and the single dads and African Americans, Latinos. What did I forget? And I'm for you. That's what I'm getting from Hillary's camp this far. And I honestly think, and I may be way too optimistic, but I honestly think if she continues with the ad campaign versus Bernie's substantive conversation with America, I think she loses, because I think that's what happened with Obama. I think it's almost trying to do the same thing again, only this time Obama's not in the way. Okay, so this time it'll work, right? This time I can run the ad campaign. I've got it a little crisper, cleaner, even more vague than the first time out. But that's where Obama really did capture that primary away from her, is he was willing to talk specifically about issues and have a conversation directly with America about his ideal and ideologies.
Yeah,
and I think that Bernie Sanders is a much less charismatic, much more well-rounded and rational person. So I'm getting better arguments, better conversation from Bernie. A little less charisma, but I don't care. Really, honestly, I don't really care about the charisma in my president.
You know, Pamela, if I can, I don't know if you can, I can bring you in, but I remember at one point you wanted to run for office in your area in Australia, and even though, you know, no financing, maybe you didn't have a chance to win, but you could move the conversation. You forced the mainstream people to address the conversation.
And I did. And then instead of being on the stage at the forum, because I couldn't run because I could have, but I chose not to. I found out I was pregnant a week before the nominations closed. So I helped organize the forum, and I asked some questions from the audience. And yeah, no, it did. Made a difference. So, and I've still got my fingers in the pie. You know, a fellow who was in office, he got outed. I helped promote the other guy who outed him, and then he's been backlashing him in the media, and I wrote a piece back to him, and that got picked up by the news and all that, and he's now been kicked out of his political party. So it's all these little bits and pieces, you know, you can make a difference.
Yeah, and Bernie Sanders, that's what he's done. He's going to force Hillary Clinton, particularly if they have a face-to-face debate, he's going to force Hillary Clinton at least to be a little more specific.
Okay. Here's a comment from somebody way on the outside that knew nothing about Bernie Sanders. So I've done a lot of YouTubing, just listening to him, and here's from somebody fresh and new and that doesn't really understand him. The thing about his ideas are rational. He makes me want to believe that these very difficult, huge, overwhelming problems are solvable. In his speeches, he makes me want to believe, like, he talks about the debt and the middle class and all these problems they have, and he makes me, like, the way he speaks, it's so, he's sure of it. This guy believes it. He's drinking his own Kool-Aid, and when he says he's going to solve these issues, I believe that he believes that.
Right. But Dale, here's the important part of this, to continue with that thought, though. If you can go back in time and look at Bernie Sanders going out, being one of the few against the war in Iraq, being one of the few against NAFTA, being one of the few, I mean, he's really, if you look at his Wayback Machine, the reason he's against the TPP is the reason he was against NAFTA, which is the reason he was against some trade thing with China. I don't even know how long he's been in office, but I don't remember this one. Right? He's right. I mean, it's not just that he's promising a brighter future. It's that he's been in office over the 20 years where he was against things that had horrible endings because they made it through. You know, so and he's somebody too who takes on very unpopular causes and has made some ground. Like, I don't know if you came across it, but he's done a tremendous amount of work as he's part of the Veterans Affairs Commission. But he's done a tremendous amount of work in creating or preventing veterans' benefits from being cut, and in some cases being able to get them increased. I mean, this is one of his big causes. Being a guy who was completely against sending them to war, and yet being the champion of the veterans who are coming back injured and wounded, you know, that's somebody who is working solely on solution. So he's not just a new guy to politics who's presenting this picture of, if I ever got into office. He's a guy who's been legislating for a really long time, and if you go back, you'll find he's been very right about a lot of it. You know, he's a guy that raises the alarm on global warming. He was the guy. I had, and I can't find it now, but I had selected some quote he made during the bailouts and the savings, not the savings loan, but the bank bailouts from the hedge funds and everything else. You know, where he was really calling people out for criminal behavior, for the way that they exploited the system and got away scot-free. And he was one of the few. I mean, people in our government were so worried that the economy would collapse that they had, so how big of a money do we need to give them to keep everything going, right? This is basically what the solution ended up being. And he wanted real change. He wanted to create a lasting change after the fact, because he was against when they started to destroy Glass-Steagall. Then they destroyed Glass-Steagall. Then all of a sudden banks can do investments, and all of a sudden we had this huge problem. Again, so he was against the thing, deregulation, that allowed the problem to happen, and he was against the people who ran rampant with that deregulation getting off scot-free. So yeah, so that's, I mean, I think the more I've listened to him, because I've known about him for a long time, but not really, like as running for president, somebody who I could vote for, because he's the other side of the country, so he's legislating mostly in a land they do not live. So I've done a lot more listening to him.
Right.
And yeah,
I have
he's the first guy since Nader who I think I would be voting completely for the man and not partly or completely against the other guy.
I have the fix for the U.S. election system so that you can get a decent president in. Here it is. Instead of a 2 freaking year election cycle, it should be 6 weeks, and it should be public funded. No private money. Everybody gets the same amount of money. You get 6 weeks. You do your freaking election. You get it over with. You say your piece, and you're done. If that could happen, you would have a very, very interesting president.
So I agree and I disagree with that. I agree with everybody gets the same amount of money, or maybe we make the public airways, they used to be until Clinton privatized them. I don't even know if there's such a thing as a public service announcement anymore. I don't think that's possible because he privatized the digital. But I would agree with that part. I don't like the 6 weeks thing. And I think in the 6 weeks thing, we would have had maybe a Hillary Clinton as president. I think we could have ended up with a lot of people who, after it may have taken them 6 months or 12 months to collapse. I mean, we had this actor guy on the right. I can't even remember his name. Who started out like top of the list, and he's back to doing like reverse mortgage commercials now, right? Like, because he had maintained the image of who people thought he was this old folksy lawyer, also part-time actor who just can fix it and make the solutions right. And then after he got to talk long enough, people were like, "Oh gosh, this guy's no leader of people."
In England, and I'm not completely familiar with the English elections, but it is more of a case where the campaigns are shorter. And my perception is that in English Parliament, well, you have individual. It's different. You're not voting for the Prime Minister. You're voting for an individual in your particular constituency, and they collectively get together and pick a Prime Minister. But it's a much smaller process. I'm sure there's money involved, but there's not as much money involved. But it is very much party-driven. So it's better in that respect, but it's not so good because it's primarily party-driven. And I don't know if that's so good. Plus, I will also talk about, can you overcome money? And this is maybe you can give me information, Dale, about that last election, about the province next to you, which, as I understand it, there's a lot of oil money in that province. A lot of jobs are relying on oil money. But the new Prime Minister, a woman, is more on the left side. She's not a promoter of oil. And yet, I would assume the oil people put tons of money in the campaign against her, but she was able to win.
Well, okay, so first of all, the Prime Minister is like your president. So we have a Prime Minister that runs the entire country, and that's the equivalent of your president. The premiers run the provinces. So it'd be like a state governor. So she's a premier, and she got in, and there was complete dissatisfaction. And my suspicion, and I think I'm right here, it's because the price of oil went down. It went into the hole. And that very, very rich province that couldn't make any mistakes because oil was so high, it generated that entire economy. It was that entire province is a kind of a one-trick pony in many ways because of oil. So there is so much dissension because now people are suddenly, because the cost of oil drops, they're poorer. And now they're talking about pulling out programs, all these wonderful free programs that they have. They pay no local provincial tax. They only pay a federal tax. So there are all these advantages to being there, but suddenly the cost of oil goes into the ground, and then you can't do anything right. I don't think it would have mattered who was in that party. They're going to change them out just because people are pissed off. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the economy does rule. In every single election that I know of, whatever the other issues are, the primary issue is the economy rules. And if the voter can say I'm better off or just as well off as I was, the incumbent tends to win. And if the voter says, you know what, I'm not doing so well, I don't know, then the other candidate stands a much better chance of winning.
If I can chime in on the what you were just talking about, that's talking about Alberta, and I think they weren't voting somebody into power per se; they were voting somebody out of power. There was three parties. The party that got in, who's currently in power, they were the NDP, and prior to the last election, they had single-digit support, so maybe 9%, 15%. Don't quote me on exact numbers. And for the most part, it was a very right-wing, very conservative, and it's been like that for years. But it's just the conservatives and the Wild Rose Party, who was the other party, were just so complacent and so arrogant, and they just all of their policies, building extravagant penthouses, all these really, things. Those were all things along with the economy that was kind of just a nail in the coffin. So, the price of oil dropping is one thing, but there were a lot of other factors which were compounding. So I think that they were voted out. They weren't necessarily, the NDP weren't voted in.
It was a very interesting election. It was for that particular province, for Alberta, that was such a conservative province. It's always been, the heart of conservatism. And
yeah, I guess the American example would be, if you want to look at the Republican kind of strongholds of Texas, that would be like waking up one day and seeing Texas all Democrat, which is something that you wouldn't see, but that would be kind of the best analogy I could give to it.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Well, interesting there. The greatest politician Texan was a Democrat, LBJ, Baines Johnson. Well, what happens there is the Democrats, like an LBJ, he was a New Deal Democrat going back to FDR, and he wanted to have the Great Society, and he also wanted to go to war in Vietnam. He tried to do them both at the same time, broke the country, and he was replaced. Maybe by Reagan, but I'm not sure. In any event.
Ed, how do you feel about a 2-year election cycle? Is that how long it takes? And
no, 4 years.
So, sorry, how long before they start and knocking on doors, so to speak, and selling themselves? How long is that process before a president's selected?
Well, right now people are just declaring, so you can call that a year and a half, right?
That just seems way too long.
We start about a year before here, but there's a lot of doors to knock on.
So Dale, you got to kind of think of it like Christmas. Like when I was a kid, Christmas decorations went up in the stores December 1st. You know, and then it was like it would start right after Thanksgiving, and then now you can buy your Christmas. I can actually probably, I don't know, I haven't checked. I could probably go down to the mall and buy my Christmas tree now. Like, I think they've already started. Like,
Yeah,
Christmas like comes earlier every year, and it's
There's
sort of like that. Like every year, somebody tries to get the jump and have that little extra edge of a few more weeks of visibility and a few more weeks. You know, and if you're the first person to declare, you're going to get a little bit more attention because, well, you're the only one to talk about for a little while, right? So, and I think Bernie Sanders came out pretty early, and I think it was a good thing because I think if he comes out after, you know, like who even knows who's running on the right at this point? Like, I think Trump might have just declared. I think he was, and that makes it a dozen, and they're not done yet. You know, there's still more people who are like, well, I want to run too. Well, as long as everybody else is doing it, I guess I might as well do it too.
I need an American to tell me I don't understand Trump's hair.
It's fake.
It's his signature.
Facade. Man
Why?
builds buildings with facades on them all the time. It's America. That's what you do. You build a facade.
Why would he run? What do you get paid like $300,000
promoting. He has.
a day? Why is he running?
Trump's an interesting guy.
He is a product.
He's a super salesman. His father ran a construction company or something. He went to military school. He was top cadet. He's a super salesman.
He's gone bankrupt.
Convinced people to give him buckets of money so he
And
can
he's gone
build stuff.
bankrupt like 11 or 19 times or something. Like, it's ridiculous. But he always bounces back because he's the Don. He's Donald Trump. He always bounces back because there's always, you know. But I mean, I'll give Donald Trump a pass on one thing. And he says it all the time. He's a self-promoter. He's obnoxious as all can be. But he's built some amazingly big projects that people would normally be terrified of taking on. And he's accomplished it. And I think that I like the big think aspect of him. Don't agree with him politically. I don't think I could sit through a dinner with him. Right? Like, I think he's kind of an annoying guy. But the big think thing, the ability to, well, let's build the building bigger than anybody's ever built it before. We'll put 70 floors. We'll put luxury hotels. We'll do it like this. We'll do it like that. You know, there's something about that I do admire, him being able to pull off. I'm trying to pull off your island, and I can't do it, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, the fact that he can actually rally that time and again is awesome.
Maybe we should ask him to buy Science Island for us.
No, because then you're going to have golden toilets with the bidet that speaks in French. I'm going to do this big. It's going to be 70 floors, and the island is going to be floating on a flotilla, which will also be a putting green.
Donald Trump would be the last person you'd pick for a small project. He wouldn't know how to do a small project. If it wasn't worth about, 10, 50, now $100 million, you give him $100 million, he'll put up something pretty spectacular. Less than that, not so much.
Although, Ed, I do think if you gave him a small project, like if you gave Donald Trump a bathroom renovation or a kitchen renovation, I bet it would come out pretty amazing. I bet the guy knows his materials, he knows quality. I bet he could pull that off.
Okay, I'm going to make a transition here. I'm going to attempt to move away from the Donald and from politics just a little bit because we're talking about engineering things, and I've got an interesting story about one of our favorite topics, penis transplants. And then this is the Guardian, and let me screen share once again so you don't have to look at the top of my head.
By the way, I gotta pause it before, because the penis transplant just reminded me of the head transplant for some reason. That story that we talked about maybe a month ago or so, that sounded totally makety up to me. I saw an interview with the doctor. And I saw the guy whose body is deteriorating, his head's still okay, but the rest of his body is completely deteriorating, who's volunteered for it. That's really happening. Or at least the money's being raised over the next 2 years, which makes me think it's not going to happen. It's going to raise a lot of money. And then this doctor will vanish and we'll never hear from him again. But I saw a news report like this wasn't just some blogger makety-upping it. This is maybe going to happen, and I'm totally terrified of it.
You know, there are people who say they can operate on you with their hands, some kind
Yeah,
of, you know.
That's what it sounds like. One of those.
That's what it is.
That's what it sounds like, but he's got a willing victim, and perhaps going to be able to. It's so terrifying. And when you hear him talk, too, it's like, oh, this sounds like charlatanism. And it's probably going to take place in a third world country where that's what he's raising the money for, is to bribe some country to let him do the. Oh my God, it's going to end badly. My prediction.
Well, we talk about penis transplant, which you think would always end badly, but in this particular case, it didn't. And they're the doctors. You can see their pictures there. They were behind the world's first successful operation of its kind. Now it says, and they announced the man's partner was pregnant less than a year after surgery. Got to put in a qualifier there. The man came to them and said, my wife is pregnant. So it hasn't really been verified by the doctor, but the important thing here is that his penis, this transplanted penis, does actually function. He's a South African guy, and it's Professor Andre van de Murie who led the operational team. And he said a 21-year-old girlfriend of this guy is now pregnant. And he's a urologist at the Stellenbosch University. The man's partner was 4 months pregnant, so the baby could be expected in November.
Well, wait a second. Ed, the surgery was only 3 months ago.
No.
No.
Less than a year after surgery.
Oh, okay.
Let's see, a year. I think there's, 12 months in the year? I don't know. I have to count my fingers. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm just saying less than a year could be 3 months.
That could be. You're right. Could be. But this poor guy, the man's penis was amputated 3 years after life-threatening complication arising from, and save your rant, Justin, a botched circumcision. His penis had developed gangrene. He was 18 and sexually active at the time. The doctors weren't worried about that he would be infertile, given that his testicles and sperm were not affected. Pregnancy is not unexpected because the man is having normal intercourse with a partner over quite a few years. But for the recipient, it's a big thing. And I'm happy. And he thanked the whole team. I'm sure he did. The man whose identity is being kept secret received his penis from an organ donor in a 9-hour operation December 11th at hospital, Trigerberg Hospital in Cape Town. And the first thing, of course, the guy said, can I have sexual intercourse? Yay! And he actually can. That's pretty amazing. I mean, you're talking a penis transplant. I mean, that's not like a liver or something, because you got so many nerve endings. You got to get right, and for it to function properly, that's unbelievable. There still is a bit of a concern about rejection. Now we come to kind of the sad part, and well, let me read this. The 46-year-old medic has been inundated with requests for his work around the world, but he's focusing on, this is the XHOSA ethnic group. They undergo circumcision during a traditional rite of passage. While many of the initiation schools are officially sanctioned, others are unregulated, and bogus surgeons are blamed every year for numerous deaths and injuries. the penis transplant, part of a pilot study. 9 years ago, a man had a penis transplant in China. We had talked about it in the past, but he had severe psychological problems with the recipient and his wife. This one went better. But you know, Justin, you are Justin still. I don't think you've had it.
Well, now thanks to the surgery I am.
You know, I remember one of the going back to when you guys were on KDVS. I can remember a radio show, and you and Kirsten had kind of a debate, and you were saying you were against circumcision all the way, and Kirsten and me, you know, I kind of thought, well, you know, they say it can cut down on HIV, etc. But I got to tell you, Justin, you won me over. You won me over. Penis transplant. I mean, that's all I got to hear.
Well, that and I don't know if anybody recalls this study. But it was this. They did this. They started this study in Africa, and they went to Ghana, and they went to, I think, Uganda, and they went to places where HIV was at the highest rate. It was tenfold where it is anywhere else in the world. And part of the problem I had right away with this study was it was looking to prove in what way the foreskin, through what peptides underneath or what have you, was encouraging HIV. So when you have your study saying we're going to discover how the foreskin is involved in producing more cases of HIV, it looked pretty slanted. Partway through the study, they had one group that had circumcisions and regular visits with the doctors, and one group that was sort of the, didn't. They were the control. And they announced that there was a 50% less chance of getting HIV. They stopped the study. They didn't even go to the end of the study. They stopped it midway through because already they could see 50% less chance of getting HIV. And what really had happened in the numbers was 1.5% of one group, the one that was getting regular visits with the doctors, contracted HIV, and 3% of the other group had contracted HIV. So, but it was out of thousands. When you break it actually down to what percentage overall, it was almost negligible because there was thousands of recipients and only 1.5%. So it's like 3 individuals here, 6 individuals there. Percentage of the group combined, it wasn't really that big of a difference. They also stopped the study halfway through, so they didn't see it all the way through to see what the final result would be. Plus, those who were, 3 individuals less out of the 1,000 were also getting regular doctor visits, which the other group wasn't. So, can you say that, interaction with physicians is gives you less of a chance of HIV than if not having those interactions with doctors? Yes, because you're getting the advice. You're getting, you're having people tell you more about how to keep yourself safe. But the number actually difference over the population in comparison to the population at large was so just infinitesimal. To do the study one time and say 50% reduction in HIV totally overstated it. And they went right to the United Nations and asked for money to perform circumcisions and made this big ad campaign out of it and everything else. The fact that that's what they went in to prove before they'd collected the data, to me said this is some other this is, what do you call it? Self-fulfilling prophecy sort of a scenario. So they, as soon as they got a data result they liked, they stopped the research itself and went with it, and never actually accomplished the ultimate goal of the research, which was supposedly to find out if there was a peptide of some sort involved. That part, the mechanism part of it, got completely ignored in the final summary. They got a data point they liked, they announced it to the world. Ridiculous.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah, completely. It was like the most obvious case I've ever seen of that. Also, when you also got to figure the other aspect of it is because, of course, it's voluntary because we're talking about humans. Those who would volunteer to have circumcision were probably more Western friendly than those who refused to volunteer for it. Right? So already you have elements that contribute to the bias within the study in just its construction. So, and also you did it in a place where HIV is extremely prevalent, and those with greater Western affiliation tend to get it less than those who do not have any sort of Western affiliation, because with that came education and everything else. So already the pools that they were choosing to start the study, already you could predict an outcome very similar to what they got. And the outcome they got wasn't very convincing unless all you heard was 50% less risk. Then it sounds like, wow, that's got to be a big number. Must be that 1,000 people over here got it and only 500 over here got it. No, it was 3 versus like 6 out of a population of 3,000 or 4,000. But anyway, so it was just the most infuriating study to begin with for them to start going and doing male genital mutilation, carte blanche, and creating an industry for these quacks who are causing gangrene in penises. Just ridiculous. Although, I guess, silver lining, new scientific medical advancement was forced to adapt to the gangrene penises that were presenting themselves.
Yeah, Dale, I have, when we talked about this story maybe a month ago, I know there was a doctor, I forget, maybe from Virginia, and you had asked him questions from an audience, as I recall. But his method, now this is my question, there's 2 ways. One, you can actually grow a new penis. You can take stem cells from the old penis, from what's left, and create a scaffolding like you do in some other organs, and then grow a penis made out of your own stem cells, so there's no problem with tissue rejection. Is that the procedure can you remember he was talking about maybe?
I think it's growing it from like the ground up and then attaching it after. I'm just looking for.
Wow, from all the way from the ground up. Now that might be more penis than I want to be responsible for.
What I want to know about this, and we won't know because it's the first child ever in this situation. If it is his kid, she might have.
Oh, yes.
But is it going to be the same as when you reverse a vasectomy? Because if you reverse a vasectomy, you get the mutated sperm, and you're doubling your chances of having a faulty baby. Is it the same? Because it's all been set.
So first of all, we have to clarify that also there's one portion of this procedure that isn't completely new, and I hearken back to John Wayne Bobbitt, whose Ecuadorian or Colombian girlfriend caught him cheating, and as he slept, chopped off a significant portion of his being with a kitchen knife, and then apparently drove away and threw it out the window. He had the wherewithal, apparently, to recover this lost appendage, put it on ice somehow, till the medics arrived, and they were able to eventually reattach, and it was functional, as was proven by John Wayne Bobbitt's porno movie that he made sometime after. So the reattachment of your own member of your society has been accomplished in the past.
Yes,
that part was within the realm of medical science maybe 20 years ago.
Yes, but he hasn't had any children, has he?
No. Well, I assume that wouldn't be. I mean, that's like just putting a major pipeline together. I mean, that's something they can sew back together with the tiny needle and a big microscope. I mean, that part of it can't be that difficult. It's all around it. All the blood sacs and the blood flow, that seems pretty difficult. But I assume that he would be able to, because the thing which produces that is not what was cut off.
But I'm talking about the mutated sperm.
I don't know. I don't know why that would occur. I guess if
I would say no. I would say no.
allowed to, if you aren't able to ejaculate over a long period of time, is that why?
You can look it up. It goes back in on itself, right? And they get it. They don't know why it happens, but it does. And you're getting mutations in the sperm. So if you have a vasectomy, you have it reversed, and then you try and have a kid. You're doubling your chances of having health defects.
So part of why all my kids turned out perfect is because I masturbate a lot. That's good to know. It's good to know that all of my years of constant masturbation, I was actually doing out of the selfish gene. It was for the children that I was. Well, that doesn't really make it feel better, but
role model.
Yeah. I have healthy kids because I masturbated a lot. That I like. That makes sense. That's why I have that makes sense that I have this biological drive to masturbate constantly. It's so that I can produce healthy children.
Well, getting back in this case, this particular surgery with this African kid. Now, it said it was an organ donor, and so it wasn't his own penis. It was someone else's penis that was transplanted. That makes it harder when it comes to getting all the right nerve connections and everything else, because back into his testicles, etc., so that the sperm he produces, is able to be ejaculated through this foreign penis. So that's mind-boggling to me, that they could put someone else's penis on this guy's body.
Well, wasn't that the objection of the Chinese wife or the Japanese?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's that. I mean,
that was their objection. I think is that it wasn't his, and therefore she thought she felt like she was having sex with a stranger.
That was part of it. Also, there's the and Pamela, as a nurse, you may know about this. There's the idea that what happens is some people, they may have a transplant and they think of it as an alien. It's not really their hand. It's an alien hand. Now, you equate that to a penis and things get pretty freaky. But that's what happened, I think, from the guy in China. He just couldn't think of this and visualize this as his own penis, and his wife couldn't.
His wife didn't like it. She has issues. I think she just didn't want to have sex with him. And when his penis got chopped off, she's like, oh, phew, I don't want to have to have sex with him anymore. And then he goes and gets a new penis. She's like, I didn't want that. That's not what I ordered. So I think that's more about marital issues than penis issues. Really. And that's from a woman.
Well, I guess because it's not one of those things that I'm likely to have to encounter in life, I guess I haven't given it much thought. But if all of a sudden, my significant other had somebody else's breasts, all of a sudden, I don't know. Honestly, I think she might have more of a problem with my appreciation of them than I would have of them not being hers. I think that's kind of how it would play out. I think she'd be like, oh, this part of me you like, this part of me that's not even me, this is what you like. This is what you like? And be like, well, no, it's your eyes. But, yeah, this is not bad. Right? I think that would be the awkward thing. From this end, but I don't know. I mean, I guess too.
Just from my own experience, the only real difference between them is size. Otherwise, they really all do the same thing. So if he had one transplanted that was about the same size, she shouldn't have really noticed too much of a difference. You all think they're unique and individual, but they're not really.
Let's see. I trying to phrase this properly. But I mean, I can remember. I mean, we talked about this whole black market in penises, and if you want to, I mean, there's a whole market in penis extenders and all this other stuff in the back of magazines that guys invest in.
They all work, by the way. They all work. They do. They do. I can now change channels on my television without the remote, because I have tried them all, and let me tell you, they all work. Yeah. No, that's yeah. Yeah, there was a.
Do you remember the porn star? I forget his name. He had a 13.5-inch penis. Now I don't know, Pamela.
Is that John Holmes?
If your significant other has his penis transplant and he comes back and it's 13.5 inches long, maybe you might notice the difference. I think.
Ron Jeremy wasn't. That has to be John Holmes, because Ron Jeremy was nowhere near there.
Had one that transferred about the same size, then she shouldn't have really cared too much. That's what I'm saying. The size is the only really difference. But if they're about the same size, there's nothing really. They all do the same thing. That's what I'm saying.
So size isn't the only difference. And here's the.
Help us, Dale. We've fallen off the wagon here.
Let me finish this off real quick, because the difference between a John Holmes and a Ron Jeremy, for instance.
John Holmes, that was the guy.
Yeah, if we're talking about classic porn stars, the thing that Ron Jeremy was known for, yeah, he was big, but he was just, was okay. But he was a woodsman. And by woodsman, it means that he could keep it up in real time without, this is pre-Viagra, right? This is pre-supplement, this is pre-juicing, pre-penis juicing, right? He could keep it up for the real shoot, right? So, and I wonder, it seems like with the foreign added appendage, the Chinese wife's complaint might partly have been, there could be because of the nerve ending reconnections may not really actually take place. The blood flow might be there, but the nerves may not actually get fully reconnected, which means there's a lack of stimulation. There's a lack of stimulation physically, but the mental is still there, and then you could see the 4-hour intercourse taking place. And that might be what the Chinese wife was actually objecting to. Her Minuteman turned into a project that was.
I gotta say, I hate that. I'm like, come on, I've got things to do.
Right. Well, right, and I, not every woman wants a woodsman.
Get in and get out. Get in and get out.
It's okay. Let's do this thing. I got other places to be, and with a lack of sensitivity, but still having the mental, arousal going on. I could see this being sort of a never-ending story taking place. And so she may have not been a fan of his dragon.
I noticed a sort of a reoccurring theme on this show. Every week it turns into word porn.
I blame Justin.
I think part of it has to do with, this is normally a time when I'm not doing a science show or this show. This is normally the time in which I have available to watch porn. So I apologize for interjecting my hobbies.
You know what happened tonight? Tonight, Dale and Pamela. I mean, I started off with some perfectly good science stories about animals. I got nothing back. I didn't hear any big.
Hey, we talked about the Pope. We talked about the Pope.
Well, yeah, but that was later. So I figured, I got to pick something that's going to get the audience going here. So.
No, I was doing the worms, but Chelsea was making a lot of noise, so I had to mute. She had a noisy toy going off. But the worms are really interesting. I want to hear more about the worms.
Yeah, we got a lot of rants tonight, and I've got my own. Well, it's a question. The next story I'm going to get into, and I read an article in the New York Times, and this also something Justin briefly mentioned last week, which is the myth of the white minority. And what the gist, what's that? Okay, you got me. Okay, Dale. Uh-oh. That can't be what it looks like.
We're going to play Name That Object. Can anybody identify what this is?
That looks like something between a conch gun and a something you would use to inflate a soccer ball.
Yeah, it's a pump.
Okay, watch, you're close. I'm going to actually activate it. And watch this. There's a button.
Huh. That's really, it's a hammer that prevents you from hitting your thumb.
It is a solder sucker. It is. It's a solder sucker. So when you're soldering, when you have hot solder on a board and you want to remove it, you heat it up with a soldering pencil. When you push this in, it's basically creating that suction, and you take the small end and you put it on the board, and when you press the button, it rapidly sucks the hot molten solder into this blue chamber and takes it out from the board.
Awesome.
Interesting, right?
That is a unique piece of equipment I have never seen before.
Now you've seen it all. Now you know what a solder sucker is.
Okay, we're gonna get. Well, no, we're not actually gonna get serious. I shouldn't pretend otherwise. But anyway, I'm gonna plow ahead. This story addresses the problem in coming up with relevant information concerning a society. We have in the United States, in most countries, you have a census. And the census is an attempt to get a picture of the people who live in a country. But the actual information that the census is filled up with, okay, my iPad is distracting me here. It's making it. I've got this little voice-activated thing, and it's going crazy. Excuse me. Okay, putting that away. Back. Am I lagging? I think I'm lagging here. In any event, attempting to discuss this story. It's about, well, I'll read from the article. In 2012, the Census Bureau announced that non-white births exceeded white births for the first time. In 2013, it noted that more whites were dying than were being born. In March, it projected that non-Hispanic whites would be a minority by 2044. But the forecast of an eminent white minority, which some take as a given, is wrong. We will seem like a minority white society for much longer than we believe. The predictions make sense only if you accept the outdated, illogical methods used by the census, which define a minority as anyone who belongs to any group other than non-Hispanic white alone. In the words group and alone, a host of confusion lies. Pew Research Center released a multiracial American a study. How problematical these definitions are. 8.9% of Americans who now have family backgrounds that are involving some combination of white, black, Latino, Asian, and Native American. And my point is that the census forms themselves are asking people to fit into a little box, you know, and there aren't enough boxes anymore for all the different ethnic, racial varieties that now exist, and by varieties I mean mixed race people. The other part is that we're talking about self-reporting. So I've got a two-part question. The first part would be, you're talking about self-reporting. In the case of the U.S. Census, you're asking people, to check off a box. In some cases, you can have someone with a white Caucasian parent and an Asian parent. Depending on where the child is raised, which culture, if you will, it's raised in, it could identify itself as either a white person or an Asian. So this is just self-reporting. And in the Pew Research group, they do use statistically valid sampling techniques, but they're calling up somebody and they're asking that person to give them their opinion over the phone, and you don't know if that person is really going to give an honest opinion. Maybe they're going to tell you what you want to hear. Maybe they're going to give you the answer that is going to make them look better. Self-reporting, I question whether self-reporting with either the U.S. Census or these Pew Research group, if self-reporting, we can have a lot of confidence. If we can have a high confidence level in any kind of a study that involves self-reporting. And my second question is going to be, is it even relevant? In the United States, collecting all this information with a census, you're asking people to mark off little boxes, and there are 43 different boxes. And let's say I'm a white person. Okay, I'm white. Okay, I could be born in Australia. I could be born in South Africa. I could be born in Russia. And depending on the country that I'm born in, I'm going to have a very different idea about things. So I think that census form at this point in American society is irrelevant. So let me start with Dale. One is self-reporting in any scientific study. How much confidence can we have? And in a multicultural, multiracial country that's counting people by ethnic groups, is that even relevant?
I believe that self-reporting just shouldn't be part of a scientific study at all, ever. I think you can get interesting correlations and things, but if you're ever searching for pure causation on anything, self-reporting is just it's just not it's not getting to the heart of anything if you self-report, because then that's you need independent overview on anything you're doing. Otherwise, the confidence is not there.
I don't know, Justin in Canada, the other Justin in Canada, do you have an opinion?
Well, the one thing, when you're trying to gather, we have a Canadian census, which is similar to the American census. I would argue that even though the census, it's definitely has its issues, it's the only tool that we have in order to gauge, our society. So the data gathered from that is going to drive public policy. So if we don't know who our ethnic makeup is, we don't know where to allocate resources. So if we don't know how many new people are identifying as, say, this group or that group, well, we may need to put certain resources towards engaging people from different minorities. I know through sociology, generally if you have a first generation, just came to Canada, they will normally identify as whatever their original country is. And second generations may, for example, identify as Chinese Canadian, and normally by the time you hit third generation, they will identify as Canadian. So over time, they take on that Canadian identity and they leave their original land of descent identity behind. I know in Canada we have what they call the short form census and the long form census. In Canada, it's actually illegal to refuse the census. They do it because they need the information. What they'll do is the short census is kind of people will call you up on the phone and they'll ask you a few questions over a few minutes. Then the long form census is something that they'll mail out to you. You need to fill out and send back. The two forms and the questions they ask different questions, but they have different validity checks in place to compare the two. So, if the two of them check out, then, obviously there's going to be a higher level of validity in it. But yeah, it's just one of the problems with the soft sciences like psychology is it's not a pure physical science like chemistry or physics. Self-report is the way that you get information. Sure, you could do some more in-depth kind of causational studies, but the resources just aren't there to do it on that huge scale.
Okay, Justin in California.
I completely agree with Justin of Canada. He's right on. In fact, I think we have a similar thing here now. We have the mail out and we have the door-to-door version. And I haven't received one in years, maybe because I move around too much. But one of my coworkers received it, and he was complaining about this form. He was like, "Do I have to do this?" I was like, "Look, you're being asked to do a civic duty. There are people who have gone to foreign countries and lost limbs in doing their civic duty, their duty to their nation, their national duty. You're being asked to sit down for 5 minutes and fill out a form and send it back, right? Like, this is what what your country is asking you to do, and you're gonna refuse it? Like, yeah, it's not perfect, as Dale says. The self-reporting aspect of it is always subject to not being completely accurate for an individual, but that's why they're not just going to ask you to represent your entire town. That's why they're going to all of your neighbors and asking them. The consensus on the census will be more or less accurate, and it is going to drive public policy. And it is, the fear of the third party sort of deciding what to proclaim for it instead of the self-reporting. The alternative version of it is, you ask a representative, well, what's the income in your district, right? Like, and let them decide. Well, everybody's happy. Everybody believes in my political views. Everybody. One of the most interesting things to come of the census, to me at least, that's given me some optimism, is the number of people who are listing themselves as non-religious. Especially with, not to get back to the politics too quickly, but with the amount of weight that the GOP has put on being a religious party. The census has shown a trend in the United States. As Barack Obama said, this isn't a Christian nation any longer. It's also, it's not just a Christian nation. It is also a Jewish nation, a Muslim nation, a Buddhist nation, a nation of non-believers. And that number is growing. That non-affiliated number is growing, and it should inform the body politic at some time as well. So across a whole swath of issues, knowing what the American people think, where they come from, what their economic status is in different regions, allows you. The census from Baltimore should have shown a need to have taken action, right? So nobody in politics in the city of Baltimore or the state of Maryland can say they had no idea there was such abject poverty in this area, right? Because the census should have told them there's an area with a problem financially, economically. There's a reason to take some direct action and to get more involved. So our census, as Justin in Canada says, does drive policy, and I think it's one of those things that if you receive a census, take the time, fill it out. Think of it as that civic duty that others have given much more to satisfy, and you're being asked this small thing to contribute, and just do it.
Okay, Pamela, to the question of the relevance of a census that tries to count people by race, is that really relevant in a very diverse society?
Well, I wonder why they even do it that way anymore if they want that information when we have the technology to just grab a piece of my hair and run it through a machine and see what my ethnicity is. And then you get it accurate. You don't have to self-report. You've got the DNA to say where you know what it is. Because there are health reasons to know ethnicity, because there are some races are more prone to some diseases. You know, in Australia, diabetes is terrible for Indigenous Australians. And part of it is because they haven't been exposed to the European diet for as long. So then they've got this European diet as of a couple of hundred years ago thrust upon their bodies that have been used to purity, and it's made them ill. It takes generations to evolve and to be able to take it on. So that's just one example. There are scientific reasons to know ethnicity, but there are scientific ways to know it. You don't have to self-report.
But then it's also, the ethnicity thing is a little bit ridiculous too. Did I talk about my Asian friend last week?
I don't know.
So, because I think this was actually spawned from when it was at work, and one of my coworkers was talking about, he didn't want to do the census. He thought it was a waste of time. And we were talking about, like, well, how do you identify the race thing? And we were talking about whether or not one of our coworkers would or would not identify as Asian. He's like, no, I wouldn't identify as Asian. Maybe Southeast Asian or South Asian. I mean, but he's really, like, it becomes very difficult because he's predominantly, you would say he's Indian. But that's Asia. That's the continent of Asia, right? Like, if you're European, you're European. If you're Asian, you're Asian. He's like, well, no, because that can't be right, because, well, there's Asians, for one, and then there's Russians, which is just made up of white people. But then, right, okay. So, and then also, he was also particularly difficult to nail down because, well, kind of he's Indian, and kind of he's Pakistani, but not really, because he comes from the Kush region. His people actually migrated from that region between India and Pakistan, that both India and Pakistan are constantly fighting over, but considers itself its own people. So it's, so the ethnicity thing, like, for me, has always been difficult, because, like, do I have to pick one? Like, I have enough to choose from that I've always put the other. Because that's just, like, too complicated. It's like there's not enough conversation. There's not enough detail in this. I can't check off 7 or 8, different boxes and claim all of them. So that part of it is a little bit. But, where it comes into importance is some place like San Francisco, where you have a district where, okay, Chinatown, for instance, when they did the census there, they realized there's a very large population of Chinese people in Chinatown. Maybe that's a place where they should invest in the DMV having the forms in English and in Chinese. If you go to Fresno, California, maybe the Chinese documents, we don't have to order so many of them, but maybe the Spanish documents should outnumber the English documents. Like,
so
there's things you gain from the census that allows you to communicate with your population better, which is extremely important when you're talking about communicating information about driving laws, as the DMV example, or health alerts, or whatever else it is that the government may need to communicate to its population. Knowing that there's a predominance of a different language being spoken in a region can be very helpful.
Yeah, but that's regional. My position would be, if what counts is relevant information, relevant social information, which you can gather by looking at that particular location or looking at a behavior. For instance, if you're, what difference does it make if X% of the population is African American? That doesn't tell you anything. Now, if you go to a particular part of the country, if you go to a community, and in this community, you can tell from your IRS records that people are poor, okay, now you go into that community and you ask the question, is there social relevance to the fact that a large number of people in this community are African American? Then now you're getting some information.
Okay.
But just saying the country as a whole.
Right. Well, because when they do the national census, a lot of it is being used regionally. I mean, and district by district. I mean, they're collecting it nationally, but okay. So you have to think of it. Here's an example of where a national census falls into the interest of what the federal government's protectorate mission is over regional politics. You look at one community. One community comes up as, in your example, African American. You also notice that the amount of bank loans in that area tend to be a little bit low. There's less home loans being issued in that particular region. Specifically, you can correlate it and say, well, there's 5 banks in the region. 3 banks actually have the normal numbers that they're supposed to, but there's 2 banks that don't have a single home loan in the district in which is reported as African American. Then, as the federal government, you can now enforce laws against redlining districts based on race. Right? So, I mean, that's one idea that popped into my head in terms of why the census would be required for the federal government to even know that there's an action that needed to be taken to prevent illegal activity or discrimination. Right? Yeah, but so you know, it depends on whether you believe your federal government, the laws that are there are for the betterment of the population or there to exploit their population and bring black helicopters and take away people's guns, right? Like, if you understand the mission of the federal government, you understand why it's important for them to have information that's actionable. If you're afraid that the federal government is there to just figure out a way to kill off the population and have some other country move in, then yeah, you should not trust your census, right? But it can expose part of the. I mean, I guess we're focused largely on the ancestry question, right? The racial question. But it can expose whether or not there is racial segregation, institutional segregation. You know, I mean, I don't think you can have the Justice Department come in and say there is you know, in Missouri a place where the police population doesn't match the population that they're policing, if you don't have some census data to back it up. You know, I mean, that's how we know. On the federal level,
you can't get that information any other way than through the census. I don't know the answer, but I question that.
Well, you know, it's not. You know, it's maybe not the only tool, but I think it's a pretty effective one. I think it is a pretty decent tool to show, you know, what's going on generally. And the self-reporting thing, you know, I'm not a fan of the short form, but the long form was a little better. And then you know, I found this is my great-grandfather. This is, gosh, 1919, something like this. My great-grandfather responded to the census. But back then, the population was so small, apparently, that the census for the people that they polled they would write like a 2-page biography on the person in the census. They would name their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents if they could, what they did for a living, who their children were, and tell a little story about how they came to be. Now, I found this document on my great-grandfather, and I learned more from this one document about my own history than any of my parents, uncles, aunts, even grandparents seem to know. And it's so, you know, to me the census is actually diminished in its information gathering a little bit. From a historical record, it's somewhat important, I think.
I don't know.
Well,
You want to say something, Pamela? Go ahead.
Yeah, there's plenty of historical information on the internet. I don't think we have to worry about things being lost like they were before in the past. But I was just going to say, even self-reporting, you were saying about the religion. Well, about maybe 10 years ago, we had a census here, and more than 75,000 people sarcastically said Jedi Knight. So guess what? Jedi Knight is a registered religion in Australia because more than 75,000 people put it on the census.
Well, yeah, isn't it?
Well, it is. It is because a certain percent of the population put it on.
Yeah, and in a way, I'm sort of I am sort of against that, and that's why I do mean it. I do honestly think it's a civic duty. I think it's one of the few things that the federal government, outside of some taxes and some laws that they ask you to follow, it's one of the few things they actually ask you to spend a little bit of time and contribute to your own community by sharing a little bit of information. And I don't think it's invasive. I think it's you know, because the data comes across anonymously nowadays. My great grandfather did. It was very specific to this individual. But I think, you know, when you have a read on the economic developments in the region, and if you're trying to fix your economy, if you're trying to increase education or increase the livelihood of the betterment of people, it really helps to know where you need to focus attention. And the census is the only tool that we have to do that.
I don't agree with it's the only tool we have. We have, excuse me, you have IRS records, you've got bank records. You can go into a community and gather that information. You can find out that information, whatever information you want, by performing a study locally, by digging out information like I say, IRS, voter registration records.
Just have
hospital records.
NSA access to people's information through a back door without their permission, and you can know anything about people. Yes, but I'm saying this is the great thing about the census, is it's being done with your permission.
Yeah, there's one issue that you're mentioning about all these government departments collectively have all of our information. So if the Department of Justice, which has our criminal records, could talk to the IRS, they could know if we have a criminal record, how much money we made, and talk to the Registry of Motor Vehicles to figure out if we have any driving infractions. But a lot of these departments are very siloed. So if you know, the Department of Justice wants to know how much money I made, at least in Canada, they need to go to a judge, get a court order, and subpoena that information. It's set up like that for protections, because a lot of that information is very personal. It's very identifiable. With the census, it's a way to gather anonymized information. So if I report, okay, I make, you know, say $30,000 last year, well, they don't know that me specifically I've made that. They know that, you know, I'm one data point. The value of an individual data point is useless. It's how all those different data points. Sorry, I had my headset up here. It's how all those different data points connect together and the relationship between them. So if you have enough data points, we're talking big data. We're talking, you know, there may be a lot of confounding variables in there. You're going to draw wrong conclusions. But for the most part, it's the best tool we have. It's like democracy. Democracy is not perfect, but it's the best form of government we have compared to all other ones. That's kind of the same thing with the census. It's not a perfect tool, but given the alternatives, I don't think we want to start going after people's individual records. That's very costly and it's very intrusive.
Totally
The
agree.
information you
Absolutely.
get, again, I'm back to the accuracy in that case. I don't believe the census is enough. The census is accurate enough. Certainly not accurate enough. I'm going to screen share the U.S. Census. Oh, there we go. Here's the U.S. Census form. Now, here, look at all this information. And again, it's asking you to fill in a box. So if you go to Hispanic, person number 1, either Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin. Yes, Mexican American, Chicano, Puerto Rican, Cuban, other. Then you got one box for white. And I don't believe one box for white is adequate. There are too many different categories that can fit into white. Again, you can be a white Australian. You can be someone born in Australia who's white. You can be someone born in South Africa. You're an African, you're not white.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd be African American if you were born in South America. So this is, yeah, you're right. This is the ridiculous thing about, this is why I always click other, because none of this makes any freaking sense. Right? Like, there used to be a box for Italian. They took that away, and Italians are supposed to check white now. Screw that! Right? Like, no, I don't want it. Like, I'm not, I mean, some of my people are white. Well, that's Irish. Well, wasn't Irish a separate box once? Like, Irish was a minority. Like, yeah, to me, the racially tinged aspect of that census is that white box, because you're only white if you're not from anything other than, Caucasian.
For example, you're white, Justin, but you have a distinct brown tinge to you, right? So my daughter is redhead, blue-eyed. She is white on white on white. But she lives in the skin cancer capital of the world. So that's a medical thing that, you want to know. Do we need shade over our bus stops? How many redheaded, blue-eyed white people are living in this community catching school buses, right? So there's reasons for this, to know this. But there's a big difference between you're white and my daughter's white.
Right.
Yeah, so
well, I don't consider myself white. I like all my black friends think I'm white. All my Hispanic friends think I'm white, right?
But home says you're white.
Friends think I'm white. My white friends, they haven't figured it out yet, but they don't think I'm white.
Right. So you need, that's me. Yeah, that's what we're all saying. The white part of the form is incorrect because there's different shades.
Right, and there is no box to check for Irish, Italian, Portuguese, Jew with a little Native American. There's no box to check for that. So until I get that box, I'm checking other because it's complicated. It needs to have that. Like a Facebook is smart enough to have it's a complicated button, right? Like I need it's complicated. But I do also understand. From a federal viewpoint of its society, the data gathering, I mean, I'd actually kind of like the race thing removed to some degree because I don't feel like no matter what racial policy is enacted, I'll be represented. But on the other hand, it's probably helpful to understand where you need an English as a second language funding for schools. It possibly is helpful to know what languages to put the DMV paperwork in your community. It is likely going to benefit the federal government and therefore the nation as a whole to know that there's an influx of 1 or 2 or 3 or a dozen different groups to whatever region, right? I think that information is helpful for policy making and decision making and everything else. And like Justin from Canada said, my Indian Pakistani Kush friend grew up in a small farming town nearby. you know, and he's got a little bit of the, you know, typical farm folk softness in his words and honesty about him. You know, he's farm folk. He's completely American. So yeah, his identity, if he's trying to check a list, gets really complicated if you're talking about racial identification and all the rest of it. But he's apple pie in terms of being an American, right? So that's it becomes, with that next generation, something that's indistinguishable. And so maybe I think if you replaced, maybe this is Ed's point, maybe not, but if you replaced the racial identification with a language identification, maybe it would be more useful, you know, to an extent. I still think there's that redlining thing. I still think a lot of the racial questions originated, probably weren't asked before 1968, probably came about through federal regulation of anti-discrimination laws. You know, I do think that if we were taking a census in 1950, they might not have been as interested in your nation of origin. I feel like it's more important in identifying places where institutionalized racism may be active. But I think maybe language of preference might be just as good of a question.
Dale, do you have any question? Any comment?
Not really. I think I kind of agree with both Justins, but it's the best. Like the systems we have set up today are the best there is, right? That we can do, that we can pull off, and like this is going back to accuracy of collecting data just amongst the population. And yeah, what else are we going to do? What's the alternative? And before it went back to Pamela was talking about like just send a clip of hair. I think eventually it could be that, right? It could be part of the medical establishment where as that gets cheap enough, that's very simple and straightforward, and you can define it into very, very discrete terms at the genetic level. But yeah, self-reporting and all this, if that's kind of, I don't know. I don't believe in the accuracy of it, but what do you think, Ed? What are your thoughts on it?
I think on a national level, questions of how many total people of a particular race live in the United States is meaningless at this point. Absolutely meaningless. I think you look at one, behaviors such as discrimination. Well, okay, you can look at an area and you can ask the question, how many people have reported discrimination? Okay, now you have something. These people have reported discrimination. How many of these people belong to different ethnic groups? And if you know 40% of them, 50, 60% of them belong to one ethnic group or one racial group, now that's telling you something important. But I think that information, to be meaningful, needs to be drilled down more to the local level. And you know, the old traditional census you just saw a picture of, which was created like 1940s and 50s, is meaningless. In fact, the consensus serves one primary purpose, and that is to identify the number of people who live in a state and a region for the purposes of knowing how many representatives they should have in Congress, because the House of Representatives is based on population. So there you need to know the population in different states. And as population moves from one state to another, the number, one state may lose representatives and another state may gain representatives. Okay, that's true. I will say that's also irrelevant. What we should count is registered voters. My opinion, you don't want to bother to vote. Don't, you know, if you've got a lot of people voting in one state, they're the people that should have more representatives. And the actual number of people living there is less relevant. So I look for change. I think we should change how we gather information, and again, make it more focused, make it more local as our technology improves, giving us the ability to drill down and get at that information.
I think you should run for president. I like everything you just said.
You don't like me, Pamela? You got something against me? Why the heck did I want to be president? Are you kidding me? I'm retired. I get to spend my day in anything I want. Come on, Pamela, give me a break.
You can hire assistants. With the what does he get paid? 300,000 something. I was going to say something. I've forgotten what I was going to say. Oh yeah, but it would be motivation to vote. That's right. If you're not getting the right amount of members, because it works completely differently here. But if you're not getting the right amount of representatives, then you better go vote to get the right amount. Yeah. I think that would work. Voting's compulsory here anyway, so. But then again, a lot of people go in and vote for Mickey Mouse because they're forced to take time out of their Saturday, and they're hungover from Friday night, and they want to get on with their Saturday night drinking, so they run in and put anything down. So that doesn't really work either.
Okay. I don't know, Dale,
voting,
how much longer? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, is voting compulsory in Canada?
It's not. They were talking about putting in some type of mandatory legislation, putting in fines, that kind of thing. But a lot of the times, there's three, for the most part, major parties, and you've got one on the right, one on the left, and another kind of center left. And so there's still a lot of viewpoints which aren't represented in Canada. You know, there are other smaller, parties, but not one that ever has a chance of ever taking power. And some people will just go in and just to spoil their ballot. So if you spoil a ballot, it's counted as being voted, but it's sending a message to the government saying that none of the people who are running are representative of my views. So.
Okay. Dale, I don't know how much longer you're going to be here. I did have one science story. It's actually something that Kirsten covered yesterday in This Week in Science, but it could be a very important story, really breakthrough perhaps. And if you're going to be around for a little bit longer, maybe you can cover this story.
All right, which one?
This is I've just posted it in the chat area.
Oh, okay. GMOs, my favorite. Anything GMO flavored, I'm totally into.
CRISPR-Cas9 in there too. Wow,
This is all good. So scientists use molecular lock and key for potential control of GMOs. Just having a quick look at this article. So researchers have developed a way to put bacteria under a molecular lock and key as a way to contain its accidental spread. The method involves a series of genetic mutations that render the microbe inactive unless the right molecule is added to enable its viability. Cool. The work appears this week in the journal ACS Synthetic Biology. The findings show promise as a practical method of biocontainment as advances in synthetic biology and genetic engineering prompt more research into techniques to control newly created organisms. The researchers worked with a strain of E. coli commonly used in research labs targeting 5 genes that are required for the organism to survive and devising easy ways to modify them. They created mutations in the genes that would require the addition of the molecule benzothiazole, I'm not sure, in order to function. This approach is very robust and simple in that it only requires a few mutations in the genome. The molecule serves as the key, and we engineer the lock. So the car would still run if it lost its rearview mirror, but wouldn't go far without the camshaft or fuel tank, said Lopez, now a postdoctoral researcher in Anderson's lab. Organisms are the same. Some parts are essential and some aren't. So the 4,000 genes in E. coli, about 300 are essential to its survival. What we're doing is putting an ignition switch on a handful of the bacteria's essential genes. Without the right key, the bug won't live. The technique turns the bacteria into a synthetic auxotroph, an organism modified to require a particular compound for its growth. It could potentially be applied to organisms being engineered to treat diseases, the researchers said. Because those pharmaceuticals entail the introduction of organisms into the body, mechanisms are needed to ensure that the organism is activated only when needed. This is just one instance of how you can do it, but it's my hope people will see and realize this as we do this lock and key approach with other proteins and other organisms. Missed a paragraph there. It says switching on a single gene improved viability 1,000,000-fold or 100,000,000-fold, and combining several gene locks resulted in a 10 billion increase in viability, according to the study. That's interesting. So the researchers noted that other approaches to biocontainment rely upon a kill switch that poisons an organism. The concern, they said, is that the organism may evolve a way to survive that signal. So they noted that in their approach, the default state of their organism is death, and that the researchers must actively turn on the genes to enable its survival. The inspiration came back from techniques dating to the 1940s when biochemists were researching the conditions that would enable microbes to live or die. Biologists discovered that mutating the genes of mold could alter their sensitivity to pH levels, temperature, and other conditions. So yeah, I'm not going to go through the rest of it, but they're creating safety systems, and as we keep refining this and get better and better and better at it, we'll have mastery over our environment, and I look forward to that when that's possible. When, you know, it kind of makes sense. If the default is the death of the organism, and it can't evolve out of that state, that sounds like a fairly rigid idea. Like it's not going to create any sort of issues. And to begin with, I don't know how many issues are really out there with GMOs at the moment for as far as safety. Where have we lost containment of GMOs? I can't think of anything where we've had horrendous impact from genetically modified organisms. Has there been anything you know of, Ed, that where we've lost containment on something we've genetically modified and it's ruined an ecosystem or something?
There have been claims made for things like Roundup, where seeds drifted across into another farmer's area, another farmer's farm. One thing I can think of. I don't know that this would really have anything to do with pesticides. I'm seeing this as more lab controls in laboratories, as opposed to controls of organisms outside the lab. I guess, well, if you're talking about biological weapons, I don't know that this, well, I guess if you could have the kill, well, it would be a kill switch, so that you could, the poison gas in the other guy's territory, and then when you get there, turn it off. I don't know. I see this as mostly focused on controlling organisms in the laboratory.
Well, I think that's where it always begins, right? It may begin in the laboratory, of course, but as we get mastery over these things,
they might provide psychologically. I mean, there is a lot of psychological opposition to a concern about spread of GMOs. This could address that point. I can't think of any incidences. I don't know. I mean, all the incidences I think of, you're talking about pesticides spreading. You're talking about, maybe something, nutrients getting into the waters, and you're now talking about possibly these algae blooms and things. But I don't know that this particular process or procedure has anything to do with that.
Yeah. Well, you maybe you're right. So, but I guess it's the whenever you start something like this and you get mastery over any sort of, whether it's biological or not, right? We're slowly getting mastery over biological organisms, where we're beginning to understand it at such a level that when we mess with it, the byproducts that are created are also understood. Everything's becoming much more targeted. To me, like, stories like this are super exciting, because it affects humanity, or it will affect humanity at profound levels eventually. And there's also the double-edged sword, right, where it can also cause great harm. Targeted weapons that are biological hazards and all sorts of things. But we've always survived it. We've survived nuclear hazards. We've survived all sorts of things. Any new technology, whether it's the cavemen and the first fires that were used, right? When they discovered fire, that was a type of technology. And, in cases it was used for harm. But like anything, any new technology, we've kind of survived it. So I think we'll also survive genetically modified organisms. And
I'm not as concerned. I'm not that concerned about genetically modified organisms, because that represents every organism that we've ever had any control over. Anything we sell in the store, I mean, it's all GMO. And by genetically modifying organisms, that's how we create organisms that are more helpful for us. That's actually essential, I think, for the future.
But there's a difference. There's a difference between naturally grabbing two species of sugarcane and growing them into one that's strong enough to withstand a cyclone, so you don't have to replant your crop all the time. And there's another where they're putting pig DNA in tomatoes to ward off fruit flies or something. There's a big difference between those two types of genetic modification.
Yes, there's a big difference between the two, but the question is one better than the other?
I would say they're different means to the same end. So one is a very slow trial and error natural process, and the other is a very rapid, change. So whenever there's rapid change, you're always going to get the possibility that, if I'm sure going back to the analogy of fire, I'm sure a few people got burnt when they were inventing fire, or taking the natural occurrence of fire and adapting it to cook food on it. The one thing you're talking about, well, why would you want to protect food to begin with, or these GMOs? A lot of the companies are putting copyright and patents on it, so I'm almost viewing these protections not necessarily as to prevent contamination, but maybe as a type of copyright. So if you can get a hold of your competitors' seed, reverse engineer it, and come up with a better one, maybe if you have some type of lock in place, you can prevent them from doing that, or prevent the farmer from stealing it and making or growing seeds of it. So maybe there's other reasons why they're putting these locks in place.
Sure,
Good
but
point.
just like with the sugarcane, for example, that would naturally occur. Humans have just put the seeds together and let them do their natural thing, rather than letting them blow over 1,000 years for it to naturally occur. Whereas a pig will never have sex with a tomato.
Right, but if we can mess with something in a very precise way, and as you do that in the beginning with anything, it's called learning, right? We make mistakes. There will be some byproducts and things that we're not going to get perfectly, but to me it's more precision. When you're genetically modifying something and understanding the the DNA of whatever life form you're working with, and you're modifying it at each nucleotide. And we're beginning to understand that process. Is that not what science is, and is that not where we should head to continue engineering our world?
To an extent, yes. To a great extent, yes. To like in the Monsanto example, there's a indebtedness to the producer that is a little bit troubling. So they create a corn plant that is immune to the effects of Roundup. And what that allows then is for the farmer to buy Roundup and spray it all over the cornfield, and it kills all the weeds and any other plant that could grow in between the corn rows, but doesn't affect the corn plant. And that's what's been genetically modified. So once you start down that path, then the only way that you treat your land is with this Roundup. And so you got to buy that to go along with the product, the genetically modified product that you buy. So there's some monopoly of seed stock. There's some, what are the other ecological effects of having Roundup placed on going along with every ag field? You know, there's problems there. And then with the legal aspect of it has been, of course, Monsanto has been suing other farmers who have some percentage of their crop that's showing up with their Roundup immune corn. Well, how did they get it? Well, Monsanto's argument has been that they got it through a black market seed distributor, because you're not allowed to sell the seeds because they're proprietary, as Justin was saying. They're copyrighted. So if you have them illegally. Of course, this is pollination crop. This is crop that can get caught in the wind and cross-pollinate across the street to the next farmer's land. But because it's copyrighted and proprietary, they can burn your entire acreages because some percentage of it has been contaminated. So there's legal issues there. Also, one of the things Monsanto does, though, is they're one of two companies globally. One's Monsanto, one's a Chinese company whose name I've never been able to pronounce, who are distributing seeds globally. So they're also the only two companies that are actively monitoring soil viruses that make it into seeds, and then deciding whether or not that seed can leave a particular region, which is a hugely beneficial thing in preventing the spread of soil-borne viruses in the plants, which your corn plant that you're sending to a foreign country with a soil virus may do perfectly well, but that soil virus then leaves the plant and enters that soil, and the rotational crop that comes after may be devastated by it. So what we're talking about is sort of corporatized ownership of produce, of food, and that part of it is frightening. Now, the health effects of eating a genetically modified food, that runs the gamut, because it is like I think Ed might have pointed out, or Justin might have pointed out, not the same in every instance. You know, the pesticide that's introduced into the corn plant may have a slight deleterious effect on human health, but the manipulation of a tomato to last on a shelf a week longer may have none. And if they're both identified equally, then that's a problem. So what it is I guess part of the problem is our ability to understand the effects of what's being produced in genetically modified foods is being outpaced by the ability to produce them. And so we're stuck in this sort of thing like, well, we can recognize that some things have had issues and other things have been hugely beneficial. But my calculus on this is we're not going to reinvent. Oh, I didn't realize the camera's off. We're not going to reinvent the freezer, right? The canning food was one big revolution. You could preserve stuff. You could send it long distances. You could feed people far away from the farm. The second huge transformation in global ability to get food was freezing food. You could freeze food, you could freeze it on a train, you could freeze it on a truck, you could send it somewhere, it could stay frozen. It didn't get thawed out till you took it home and cooked it. Eventually, you could even put it in a microwave and thaw it quicker, right? Those had massive impacts on global hunger. And genetically modified food is really our only option at this point in creating a corn that grows in the desert, or whatever the case may be, of getting food closer to and accessible to more millions and millions of people to prevent the waves of starvation that were predicted and would have come to fruition before freezing of food became a thing that was monetarily is doubling every 50 years. We need solutions to feed all these people.
So what you've just said is every time we come up with a solution to feed people, we make too many more people, then we have another solution to feed them, and then we make too many more people, and then so this is the next solution. So what happens when we make too many more people because everyone's getting fed? I'm not saying we should starve people, but it's a trend, right? So this is the solution this time, so what happens next time?
Right. You're absolutely right. And the problem is the people who come up with solutions to combat hunger on a global scale are unwilling and have been unwilling at every stage to accept a mass famine on this planet. And you can't really fault them too much for it because it's a great thing to be for. But yeah, the ultimate toll is there will be a day in which we outpace the resource ability of the planet and our technology. There will be that day. And we will have famine, and famine will lead to war, and war will lead to mass destruction and devastation. The longer we can put that day off, the better off we'll be. And there's always the possibility, as my little cheap LED garden in my kitchen this winter, I had a winter herb garden through an indoor hydroponic LED system. You know, the more possibilities that technology can outpace that wave of famine that's been predicted for 100 years. You know, the more minds we'll be able to put to the task of figuring out how to combat it the next time around. So we may always stay ahead of this wave. We may always ride it. We may always be that much more advanced than the pending doom that's been, again, the end has been nigh for 100 years and more.
But you know what? I like people. I want more population. I want humanity to move beyond the Earth. I want to spread humanity as far and as wide as possible. Science and engineering, as we make breakthroughs in science, it gets handed, that understanding gets handed to engineers, and engineered is simply applied science, right? We're doing this with everything that we do, and we've benefited. We're living longer. We're the most prosperous. There's the least amount of wars now. I don't think we pat ourselves on the back enough on the accomplishments we've made, and it's because our you know, in our lifetime, we can't go back 3 generations of people and talk to those different personalities to find out what it was like for them. Because I think if somebody from 3 generations ago, if we sat them down and told them about what some of our concerns were, like, you've made a tomato that can last how long, and you're worried about what?
Right.
I think they would be so proud of how we've taken the science and applied it in engineering to create all of these things. And we don't pat ourselves on the back enough. We're doing very well.
Yeah, and I can go back 3 generations. Is sort of, it encapsulates this very well to me. My grandmother had 2 freezers. The one in the refrigerator would actually make 3, but she had 2 standalone freezers and so the back garages of the house, filled with food. And this is a woman who survived the what do you call it, the Great Depression, when they went from a time of having plenty to a time when everybody was living subsistence. I mean, everybody in the nation fell into poverty, pretty much.
There's sorry.
Well, and the fact that she had these 2 standalone freezers, always full of food, and a cupboard filled with canned goods, really drove home to me the importance of frozen goods and canned goods, and her fear that this could happen again. And so wanting to have, a year's supply of meat and dairy and beans, I guess, for the family, so that in case it happened again, that there would be preparation, and saw these things, as extremely important pieces of technology preventing her family from going into any sort of famine. And so the next wave is, I think, going to be, again, I mean, I don't see anything else on the horizon that's going to be as effective as genetically modified foods. I mean, we've taken farming efficiencies to a great degree. We'll do better with water in the future, but I don't think we'll have greater crop rotation as a result. I think we'll just be able to conserve water better, which will allow more farming to take place.
So
there's still advances we can make in farming itself, but this is where the future of famine prevention is going to take place. Is going to be in GMOs. So regardless of the short-term lawyers fighting farmers and potential health effects of some of the products, I think the overarching outcome is a massive positive for humanity.
Well, here's something that I was thinking of. We're trying to come up with a solution for a problem which may never occur. We're predicting a big famine, but there's a trend in industrialized nations that once a country or a nation reaches a certain level of development, there's actually a negative population index.
Mm-hmm.
In most European countries, the baby boomers are getting older, the actual working population is shrinking, and for the first time, and I think in the province that I live in Canada, this province has a negative population index. So the only way that we're going to keep up with having a working population is by having more immigrants and more people from other countries to come in to fill those spaces. Right now, the population of Japan is 127 million. Because they're a fairly industrialized nation, over the next 100 years, the population is expected to drop to somewhere around 70 million. So as all of these countries develop over time, our technology will increase, we'll be able to provide more food, but the one thing that will happen is the demand on the food system will, I think, dramatically decrease as countries of the world, India, China, yes, they have huge growth right now, but as they become more industrialized over the next 100, 200 years, they will eventually have a negative population index. Back in the 60s, they said that one of the problems of the new century would be we'd be hitting 15 and 16 billion people. The world wouldn't be able to support it. But the trend is they're predicting now, we're probably going to taper off and hover somewhere around 7 to 8 billion once all of these factors take place over time.
I don't know. I don't know if I completely agree with that, because I mean, I get that Japan, Sweden, maybe Denmark have what, emigration instead of immigration, but a large portion of it too is if it's like the Brits back in the 1800s when they had child mortality rates in the 30-40%, their solution was just have more kids. And I think this is what happens in impoverished nations when you have like child labor and all the rest of it. It's producing more kids, it gives you a better chance of having offspring. But yeah, maybe there is a plateau, but I think we're still a ways away from it. I think we're still doubling every 50 years. You know, it's one of those things. It's one of those things that politicians like. I remember it from George Bush specifically, which is that he was really proud that under his presidency, more Americans owned homes than ever before. Well, the population grew 30%. Right? Like you would assume with a 30% population growth, there were and a huge people building more houses every year. Every year, you could say that people own more houses than ever before in the United States, and I don't see that trend really dissipating without something catastrophic like famine, war, or something to reduce the population. I've met people who are strict, who think population control should be a forefront issue as a way of managing resources. And Dale, I agree with you. I'm for people, so I totally reject that. I want solutions to allow the production of more people, so that we can keep growing. I think this is fundamentally, it comes down to really hard choices, and the really hard choices never get made in your own backyard. They never get made within your community. You're willing to restrict the access to food or work or industrialization somewhere else, but you never are willing to do it completely locally.
You know, Justin, I've got the perfect solution. If you want more children, motivate people to have more children. God and religion. Isn't that it? I mean, Christians, Muslims, etc., have more babies. So what we need, if everybody was a Muslim, if everybody was a Christian, we'd have, the conservative ones anyway. If you were Mormon, if you're, what's the people who, the Amish. That's what we need, because their policy is to have as many kids as you can possibly have.
To an extent, that's not necessarily a bad thing. To another extent, though, I would say in Mormonism, one of the problems with having the multiple wives, which also I think happens in the Muslim culture as well, is almost the monogamy of Catholicism is, to me, basically an expression of biological instinct more so than like the Mormon ideal. The Mormon ideal is you've got one husband and he has many, many wives. Well, what happens to that community? Community of 7 wives and 1 husband, all have offspring. You could end up three kids per wife. What is that? 21 kids, 21 children who can within a community who should not reproduce with each other. Genetically speaking, should not be reproducing with each other. When you have monogamy, you limit yourself to having children with one member of the community. Your children can mingle with all other monogamous. So it's one of the. I mean, from a genetic selection sort of a stance. This came about as I got this game on my phone called Fallout Shelter, which is like a it's a horrible time-sucking little app game. But it comes from the Fallout games, where you're managing a vault, a bunch of vault dwellers. So 10 people jump into a vault to avoid nuclear annihilation, and then they're supposed to live there for like 100 years. Well, the problem with it is, it became rapidly apparent, who do people mate with to grow this population over time? Because you started with a limited pool. If you have one person, if you have one guy who's mated with all the females in this group, the next generation can't help, has no choice but to mate with a first relative, right? So there are things that I always say to a lot of a lot of religious dogma can come down to a biological instinct. right? It comes from the ape brain. Like, you shouldn't use you shouldn't use birth control. Why? Because the brain's sex drive is wired towards reproduction. So the monkey brain doesn't want you to use prophylactic, because the whole point of giving you a sex drive is to reproduce. In the first one, this is why these endorphins are rushing. This is why you're getting all these emotional influences from your brain chemistry. You're supposed to reproduce to preserve the gene pool. So monogamy kind of makes sense in that too. So like a lot of, Christian morality exists in ape brain, right? And I think there's a thing that when you look through human history, when you look at human population's expansion over time. We were talking about the Bronze Age on the last This Week in Science. A big part of that massive migration was, as soon as a population reached a certain limit, people started to migrate. And part of the reason was to get away possibly from the relatives, but that desire, that idea that there's a set population they need to expand. To Dale's point, we do need another frontier. We need another place for this population to overflow into. We need a place for people to go, to get away from the rest of society, to continue this pioneering, reproducing, brain sex drive of overpopulation. What is that, Pamela?
Yeah, but if 20 people go there or whatever, you'll be starting with a limited gene pool. How is that good?
No, you need. I know, it's not enough. You need at least 150.
But we're talking in terms of technology being where it is now. If we're able to, take Mars and come up with technology that we're able to, it's a little more hospitable than it is now. By that time, if you send 20, we'll probably have the spacecraft that can do it very inexpensively and get people there. And if we can't, then there may be technology where we're CRISPR-Cas9, we're modifying our own genome, that if two people have sex and they're related in some way, we may be able to alter their genomes so that there is no problem with doing it. At least with sort of mutations that aren't good. So technology in the future, we're very rapidly coming to a day where all these things are going to be possible, and I think it'll be wonderful.
Yeah, if we encounter a problem, it's going to be with the population that doesn't embrace technology. Mm-hmm. If you've got
and that what you just said is, when you say embrace technology, what you're really saying ultimately is they don't embrace science. There's a lot of anti-science rhetoric out there, and they confuse it, because you know what? There's companies, as human beings, there's companies that do terrible things because the human race, where there's people do terrible things because of greed and everything else. But don't confuse it with the science, right? Science is a logical discipline of learning and understanding. We want to keep the science moving forward, and we're going to have, as Justin was saying, there'll be stumbling blocks along the way, but the greater good overall, we got to keep our eye on that prize, and it's good for all of humanity.
Also, it's interesting, Pamela, with your 20 people scenario, 20 people going to Mars, whatever, it could work with monogamy. It would be really difficult without it, actually. It could become very problematic if you had 2 or 3 men being fathering all the children. That would be really limiting. If you had 10 couples having multiple children, then there would be enough selection to keep the gene pool diverse over a pretty decent period of time. And what's also interesting is if you think of it backwards. If you think of it backwards, okay, how many of us here had 2 parents? Raise your hand. All right. How many of us have 4 grandparents? How many of us have 8? Is it 8 great-grandparents? Like, it keeps going back, right? The number, as you go back, keeps going different. And you assume all the last names would be different, right? So, but the problem with this is, as you go backwards with this math, then it's 16 great-great-grandparents and 32 great-great-great-great-grandparents. So you need 32 different last names, right? And then 64, it turns into the bits of memory, right? It just keeps... Then you got gigabytes and terabytes of ancestors. Well, no, they didn't all have the last name. Actually, as you're going back, you're not getting into a larger and larger populations. You're getting into smaller and smaller populations. And you're going to find the last names showing up more and more and more frequently, because the further back you go with this expansion of ancestors, actually the smaller the pool of people there were to produce them.
Yeah,
So,
evolution
in a
took
sense-
care of this problem.
Huh?
Evolution took care of this problem you're talking about.
Well, yeah. I mean, you don't. I mean, again, you don't have to be that separated from your ancestry, apparently, because as we go back to the terabyte of ancestors, we find that we had maybe 1,500 people. Right? Like, it was a very small pool that we came from to begin with. So sending 20 people is plenty of a
And throw in the
population.
Neanderthals.
Yeah, 20 people, 150. Yeah, Neanderthals added a huge shot in the arm to diversity within the human ancestry. Absolutely. I mean, this is a group who's been removed for 400,000 years. They don't even have the same. They don't even have last names. They only have first syllables of first names. They don't even have.
Right.
So, but I mean, I think the ideal population limit, I think we've talked about this before, for a tribe to be, to reach an optimum of diversity is somewhere simply around 150.
Yes, Dunbar numbers.
Yeah, that number is a sufficient number for the entire diversity of humanity to come from. So it doesn't take that much to really do it. I
Dale,
think
you look like you
again
wanted to
though,
say
when
something.
go ahead.
Dale, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just intently listening to what Justin.
Okay. Go ahead, Justin. You have the floor.
Oh well.
And
Okay,
you
I'll-
always make the floor very interesting.
So anyway, if we ever do come up with Science Island, I would say that reproductive sex should be monogamous.
How about non-reproductive sex? That's okay,
It's
right? We don't
totally
care.
up to anybody. It's their choice thing.
I got a quick story. You happen to mention Science Island. Well, it's kind of a Science Island story. It's in the chat area about harvesting hydropower in Wales. And let me screen share. And the thing I can relate to as someone from Connecticut, from the Northeast, is that Connecticut became an industrial power in the colonial era and pre-colonial era because of our use of hydropower. We've got a lot of small streams and things, hills and valleys, fast-running water, and that's what we built our industrial revolution on. And you've got these people in Wales. This is a farmer, Howell Williams. He has over 290 acres of steep and boggy pastures, and he's got a river, a stream that flows through it, directing just some of his stream's water down a 6-inch pipe into a turbine, all constructed for about 50,000 pounds, generates nearly 18 kilowatt-hour of electricity at peak time, and he earns 10 to 15,000 pounds a year. You work long. Now he was a farmer. You work long hours on a farm. You do not earn much at all. But my little stream works 24 hours a day, even when I'm sleeping. And though the price of land is down this year, the European grant has decreased. So these are difficult times. Helping to harvest whales' abundant rainfall should be a priority of any government, he says. I would say microhydro beats farming. This is the best pension we could possibly have. Most farmers put all they earn back into the farm, but we have to leave when they cannot go out in all weather, because they can't go out in all weathers. Now I get paid for nothing. While wind farms have divided whales because of their visual intrusion pylons, microhydro plants like howls are popular with rural communities and farmers because they take up no more space than a shed, do negligible ecological damage, and are not owned by the large, evil, remote power companies. Well, I threw in the word evil. The potential for microhydro is in this. One of the wettest parts of Britain is almost limitless. This is Chris Blake, director of the Green Valleys in Wales Community Interest Company. Community Interest Company, that's good. Which since 2009 has secured licenses for nearly 50 microhydro schemes, installed 23, and has 13 more under construction. Together, they generate nearly 2,000 megawatt hours a year. But Blake and other microhydro developers in rural Wales and the West Country say they cannot expand in many areas because large wind and solar companies have taken all the capacity on the grid. And this Ofgems, I don't know what that is, rule states that private operators, rather than public money, must be paid for an upgrade. The privatized grid in much of rural Wales is owned by Western Power Distribution. The power company is U.S. Coal, Pennsylvania Power and Light. Since buying out a German utility owned it previously, provides electricity for over 5,000 people in Wales. They say the grid is full for the foreseeable future in much of the rural Wales and southwest England, and they've asked $5.7 million to upgrade the grid and connect a tiny community-owned scheme. Connect to a tiny community-owned scheme. They don't need it. It's incredible. Privatization and OGM rules means that government targets for renewable generation cannot be met because we do not have the grid capacity. Now I'm going to stop there. What it comes down to is, with even a little bit of water, with even a small stream, you can generate an amazing amount of power. I was kind of surprised. Just a 6-inch pipe on a stream. That's perfect for Science Island. We just have to make sure we get streams.
Well, do you know that you can buy a castle that needs a bit of work for about £250,000 in Wales? So that's like 500.
Okay.
Yeah, you can get
6-inch pipe, $250,000 castle.
To that.
No,
Might need a bigger pipe, Pamela.
No, but that's pounds, so it's about $500,000. But castles come with lots of land. I didn't catch what you said, Justin. What did you say?
Well, I mean, to me it sounded like 290 acres of bogland was draining down to a 6-inch pipe. I mean, yeah, that's providence of some geography there. That wouldn't be available everywhere.
So shouldn't we make sure that wherever we put Science Island, it's got a stream running through it? We got a stream running through it. We can hook it up, and we're good to go.
That's not a bad idea. I think also though, if you incorporated this idea with rain capture, you could create your own streams. You know?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But yeah, gravity. There's a tremendous amount of power in gravity if you have a way of accessing it. So yes, let's not be afraid of sloped land.
I'm not sure if Pamela wants to say something or if she's breastfeeding Chelsea. I'm not quite sure.
Chelsea's trying to get my boobs out. I was just looking for a yes, I'll get it out for you. Yes, yes, yes. I was just looking for a photo of us in Wales in the bogland. I was just going to screen share it. It's really boggy.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Bog is good, I guess.
find it. Well, it's wet. I mean, things grow there. It's great. Bloody cold.
So I don't know. Maybe this is a Patrick question. But I got an idea for a for the what do you call it? The convection air conditioner. What if instead of, because the version of it I've had in my head is a 40-foot pipe laid, you know, could be coiled around or whatever, but it's a deep trench that's dug. But that's inconvenient for most places that don't have the land to do it, that sort of thing. What about a drilling operation? I wonder if it would work going like 40 feet down and having a pipe that recirculated, that went down and then came back up again. I wonder if that's a marketable idea. A passive convection air conditioner that you can place in your backyard with just a little bit of drilling.
Geothermal.
Not geothermal, not to get heat, no, to cool. So once you get about 5-6 feet down, the temperature of the Earth is about 54 degrees. Probably even where you are. Where you are, Dale, it might be a heater. Yeah, where you are, it might be geothermal. Where I'm at, it's called an air conditioner. Right? And the idea is you have this venting 40, 50 feet, whatever it is. Actually, if you went 40 feet down, I guess it's 80 feet of tubing because you got to go down and come back up again. And you can simply open a skylight or a high vent somewhere in the house, and the heat will rise, drawing from that cool air beneath. And that's a way to cool the house without using any electricity. Which, not using any electricity, you don't use any fossil fuels, and you don't pay any money, so it's also free. So it's got all these benefits. So, what if that would work? Do you think we could put that together as a Science Island product that we could go around and sell? Free air conditioning for a simple drilling and installation fee, plus shipping and handling.
Okay, it could work.
That is.
That's what we need. We need income. We need income. Pamela posted a picture, but I wasn't really sure. Oops, there's a picture of me. You don't want to see that. What was that picture, Pamela, of you and Chelsea?
Oh, couldn't you see it? Okay, I'll put it back.
You have to be talking when you put it up so that it goes to the selected. I know you always have your own image selected as the main image, but no, you have to be talking while it's up there, otherwise nobody can. So if you mute yourself with the image up, all they see is me talking.
Sorry. Okay, got you now. I'm trying to do a couple of things at once. There we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
So we're actually in Bristol there, but over that bridge is Wales. So it's the same, like the marsh rubbish that we're standing in there, it's the same on the other side. So that's what he's talking about there with the bog.
Makes me think that the Vikings were very incredulous on finding England. What is this mess? We sailed across an ocean to find a swamp. Nobody could possibly live here.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't have a bog. I don't want all the property to be boggy, but I would like to have a bog. With bogs you can produce peat, which you can use to fuel fires and things. But I don't think I'd want to live in, completely boggy territory. I posted a link before, and I'll try it again. If you have a chance, I don't know, have any of you heard of the documentary? Goes back maybe into the 60s or 70s, but it's award-winning, called Ben's Mill, and the guy's name is Ben Thresher, and I don't know, he might have bought it. It's a mill that was built going back to 1848. And this, in the documentary, he's like in his 50s or 60s. And it's what he did was, people in the community would come to him if they needed something. And for instance, one of the projects was a sled, a horse-drawn sled. He built it. He'd get the material, and he built it. A lot of the times, he used salvage material, being a good old New Englander. He found bales of iron. Okay, I forget what. Of iron, and he simply cut them up and made nails. So anyway, it's a good documentary. I posted a link. You can watch. Oops, what's happening? Uh-oh, Chelsea's on the run. Chelsea's frozen. This is much more fun. Forget what I'm saying. This is much more fun watching Chelsea
Sorry,
beat
no,
up on.
I went to get her xylophone so she could play with that, and I came back and she was just about to type something on the computer, and it's only a week old. Don't break it yet, please.
How's it working out? How's your Chrome?
Yeah, it's good, yeah. I mean, if you want to do a quick product review, it doesn't have as much power as I'm used to, and I do find it a bit annoying, but it's better than the Windows 8 laptop that I had. So, for my purposes, currently. And it's much lighter. My arm doesn't ache when I carry it around. It's good.
That's good. Technology, mobile devices. Wherever you go, information at your fingertips. Is there a solar battery? There must be, that you can use to recharge your laptop.
Yeah, I used one camping. It was about $350. But then I can use it in the Outback. So that's good.
You can get a cheap little fold-out solar panel thing. It doesn't give off a lot of power, but you could take that, plug it into like one of those little battery packs to charge your phone or something.
Yeah, for your phone, yeah, but you need to spend a bit more if you want to power a laptop.
Oh yeah.
But the one that we had powered 2 laptops and 2 phones. So we were just like out in the middle of the country, 400 kilometers in any direction to the nearest next person, watching Seinfeld reruns.
What else do you do in the Outback?
Yeah, that was fun. But yeah, so yeah, they're available, and I mean, just a few years ago, they would have been a couple of $1,000s. So $350 last year, it'll be $150 next year.
Is Chelsea showing any particular preference for any of these musical instruments yet?
Oh, she just loves any music, any beat, anything.
They're all equally tasty.
Yeah, that's it. No, it's all good. I got her I don't know where it is, a little whistle the other day. It's just a wooden one. So, you know, sometimes she'll just be sort of chewing it and she'll blow on it accidentally. It's all fun, isn't it? Yeah. It's all good.
Yeah.
She can play, so she got the little tongs or whatever. She can beat on the xylophone.
No, the one that came with it, I had to pack away because it's sharp, and she poked me in the eye. So I just give her, see, she can use the end of the bell.
Okay.
And that's not sharp. So. But she just bashes it with her hand and makes it sound, don't you? So.
How many instruments have you gone through so far?
Oh no, I've got them all. What have we got? A couple of ukuleles. We've got tambourine, the drum.
Ooh, the tambourine. Ooh.
I haven't. That's still packed away at the moment. I've got a harmonica, recorder. Yeah, lots of musical instruments. So yeah, and I usually have music going. You know, just playing all the time.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
We can hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, she's hitting it with the end of the bell. Yeah. And it's pretty colours. See, lots of pretty colours. It's Pamela's musical hour.
That sounded exactly like some of the stuff John Cage does. Those experimental music.
Yeah, we should cut a record.
I'm all out of science stories. We can obviously look for more, but is there anything you guys are interested in talking about?
I think I'm good for tonight. I am fading slow but steadily into oblivion, so I'm going to bid you all a very good night.
Good night, Justin.
Good night.
Oh, you guys. Well, I'm glad you stuck it out as long as you did.
It's 4 a.m. here. I have to be up in 2.5 hours.
Oh my God! Go to bed. Yeah, you weren't going to stay this long. You were just.
Well, it's fun.
You
It's
gotta
not.
be up in 2.5 hours. That means you gotta be somewhere in 2.5 hours. You can't be
I have
just
to, I have to
going
be
to
somewhere
sleep.
in like
That's
3
not
hours.
right.
So.
Yeah, Yanni, you're getting endless nights over in Finland. Midnight sun and endless nights.
Midnight Sun. All right. Yeah. That's what it's written.
I heard a rumor there's gonna be more WikiLeaks soon.
Okay. Yeah, we need to
But huh?
We need to do more meaningless words.
Well, this has become the proxy of.
No, it's not.
It's. All
I think we
right.
covered
Well,
more
I don't know.
politics tonight
I
than we
need
did
like
science.
an 8th day in the week now. Because here's what happened. Like, my 3 children, of which I usually have just one in the morning, are no longer in school because it's summer now and the school has ended. And so I'm now inundated by active children every morning, all of which apparently need their father to do something at every moment of time. That
I know the feeling.
yeah, so things are becoming only more hectic over.
Yeah, that's right. We'll work it out.
Ed, as the chief financial officer of Science Island, I do expect some sort of plan from you in the coming weeks and months.
Give me a
For us.
bunch of money. I'll put it into a bank account, and I'll let you know. Just let me know how you want to spend it. Promise.
You just need
promise.
some dirt.
Hand
I
to
feel like
God.
we just need the dirt. I feel like it's sort of like Field of Dreams. If we build it, they will come. And if they don't show up, that's fine. Less neighbors.
And Justin, Canada Justin, is also heading to bed. 4 a.m. Wow, he's an hour ahead of me. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for
Good
the
night,
invite,
Canada.
Pam, and it was great meeting you all. Justin,
Nice
I'm
meeting you.
a fan of TWIS for you, so this is kind of a bit surreal for me to, actually talk to you one-on-one, so I was a bit hesitant and a bit shy to be on, but yeah.
No, you were great input. I mean, mostly because I agreed with you, but yeah.
Well, yeah, you never want to disagree with anybody, so I always agree with them.
Yeah, I've heard that's the Canadian way, but even in your desire to be disagreeable, we agreed with each other, which means we probably didn't agree with a lot of people.
Well, that's good then.
Yeah. Good night, Canada. Good night, Yanni. Good night, Ed. Good night, Australia.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Chips at
Good
Sea.
night, meet
Wherever you may
Bye,
be.
Johnny. I'll see you guys next week.
Night.